I noticed the Chronicle is running a lot of baseball stories. It must be they're kind of tired of covering the Rockets and the Texans. So not much is going on.
They want something positive to write about.
I hope that's right. He looks good on paper, doesn't it?
Okay, let's get started. And as we have more people come on, as you know, we didn't meet last Monday because of the 14 degrees. And I hope everybody has their power back on by this time. And most folks are now able to drink water out of their fountains. That boiled water thing is about over. Unfortunately, there are a few leaks that have been found, and hardware stores are running out of pipes and what have you, and the plumbers are just overly worked.
Bob?
Yeah.
This is rolling. You know, today's National Margarita Day, so all the better reason to drink a margarita instead of water.
Yeah, there's no water in there.
Yeah, very good, very good. A couple of quick announcements. I don't know if you're all aware of the College Classic is going to take place at Minute Maid Park this weekend. They're going to have 6 college teams playing for the Shriners charity activity, and Rice will play, and TCU, and Texas Tech, and Sam Houston, a couple others. So it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. If you have some interest in going down to Minute Maid Park and seeing baseball for some very reasonable prices. Also, our newsletter is out, and we're at the point of looking for more articles for our 4th newsletter. I'm pleased to say that we already have, and Tony, you correct me if I'm wrong, we've already have at least 3 submissions.
Yeah.
One from Larry Dierker, one from Maxwell Cates, and one from Thompson. And we're looking for anyone else who wants to participate, have an article, an opinion, whatever having to do with baseball. Talk about some of the things that are taking place. You like, don't like. Talk about some of the players you like or don't like, or the new rules, what have you. So this is your opportunity to become a writer and be printed. We'd like you to do that. We have 2 new members. I don't know if they're on or not since last time. Michael Tantillo and James Land. Are either of you gentlemen on tonight?
Wait a minute. Hold on, Bob. James Land is my brother-in-law.
Are you on a commission or something, Jim?
Well, I mean, my wife was just asking if, everybody calls him Raymond, if Raymond was on, but I don't see him, so maybe she's going to have to call him and see what's going on.
Very good.
All right.
The miracle has landed. I'm not sure what that's all about, but okay. Greg just put up a book. I'm not sure what that's about. Okay, we have we're very fortunate to have 3 speakers tonight. One who has spoken to several SABR chapters in the past, and we're delighted to have him here. He lives, excuse me, in New York. He's Tom Gilbert. He's written a very interesting book, and thank Scott McKay for kind of rounding him up. Excuse me. Tom, we're a very informal group. We like to hear what you have to say about the book that you wrote and anything else, and then we'll have a bunch of questions, I'm sure. So let me turn the meeting over to you.
Okay. I don't know if anyone has seen the book or read it, but I'll just talk a little bit about how it happened. I've written a lot of baseball books over the years, and my main interest is the very early period, the amateur period, and the beginnings of baseball. And I've written a couple of books on this topic before. But there was something that always bothered me about the story that, that I've told myself and that the history books tell. And I never entirely believed it the way it was told. And then in 2015, I had kind of a crazy idea, and it was almost an intentionally uncommercial idea that I had, which was I live in Brooklyn, and I have done over the years tours of a cemetery we have here called Greenwood Cemetery. And it's a cemetery was founded in 1838, and it was for the sort of prosperous New Yorkers and Brooklynites, and there are a lot of famous people buried there. They have themed tours there. There's so many well-known people there that they have to break it down by category: artists and war heroes and actors. And there's a shocking number of early baseball people buried in the cemetery. You know, I'm sure you have cemeteries there that have some ex-major leaguers in them, and there's cemeteries that have a couple of Hall of Famers, but we have a couple hundred and counting amateur era players. And there's some more recent ones too, but you know, I used to start to wonder why these people were all buried in the same cemetery. And I wrote a book essentially trying to answer the question of why that happened. And, you know, the short answer is that baseball began in New York City. And one of the first places that spread was Brooklyn, which was a separate city across the East River. It's now, Brooklyn is now part of New York City, but it was once an independent city until 1898. And it was a small city that had a sense of rivalry with the big, older, more prosperous city on the island of Manhattan. And, you know, a lot of incredibly important things happened to baseball when it spread to Brooklyn. The thing that I learned writing about my book about Greenwood Cemetery tells the life stories of all these amateurs who were buried in there. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And there's members of the Knickerbockers and the Gothams and the Eckfords and the Atlantics and the Excelsiors buried in the cemetery. There's something we tend to kind of forget when we go back in time and read about early baseball, because you know, we live in modern times and there are things we take for granted. We take for granted that we're essentially baseball fans first, and that Major League Baseball is sort of the be all and end all. It takes up a lot of the oxygen in the room. Of course, the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that baseball as a sport was created, developed, built, and spread all across the country by people who weren't getting paid. In the amateur era doesn't really have a beginning, because baseball as a folk game goes way, way back in New York. It's too far back for us to even know when. But something happened in the mid 1850s that gave it a lot of energy. And the game started to, for reasons that I discuss in my book at length, it developed an ambition to become our first national sport. And, you know, most people walking around don't know too much about pre-Civil War America, but if we got in a time machine and we went to, say, the year 1854 and we got off in Manhattan, you'd find that almost no adults played any sports of any kind. It just wasn't part of our culture. We didn't have championships, we didn't have leagues, we didn't have professionals. What we had cricket, which was played almost exclusively by people who were immigrants from Great Britain. They brought it with them, and it was a fully developed sport. And it was sort of a hybrid of amateur and professionalism. Cricket clubs would pay their best players. But there's no real organized sports that Americans played. And in fact, English tourists like to come to America and write books about the United States and tell people in England what was going on over here. Charles Dickens wrote a book in 1842, taking his trip through America. So did Anthony Trollope's mother, Frances. These are best-selling books on both sides of the Atlantic because Americans love to hear what English people thought of them. And there's one theme that comes up over and over again in these books, which is that the English, it's pretty much the motherland of organized sports on a global level, they noticed that, they remarked about how Americans couldn't have been less interested in sports, playing it, watching it. There's only one thing that we were interested in the general area of sports, and that was betting. So there was boxing, there was horse racing, but you know, those are not really participant sports for the average person. 99% of the participation was betting on them. And the English people say over and over again, the stereotype of Americans to the English was, all we care about is work and all we care about is money. We sit in the office all day long and we don't ever get out and exercise. The whole idea of adult exercise was pretty much unknown. So something happened going back to 1854, when we got off our time machine, baseball exists only on the island of Manhattan in 1854. That was the year the first Brooklyn Club was founded. But it's something that's part of the culture of not even the entire modern city of New York. It's the island of Manhattan is where baseball was played. There were other bat and ball games that really were children's games or games played by students, with a few exceptions that I'll get to. But there's an interesting letter in 1854 that William Van Cott, who was one of the founders of the Gotham Club, one of the early New York clubs, he wrote to several newspapers trying to promote baseball. And what he said in the letter was, we have 3 clubs that are going strong and we play each other. And we have over 90 men playing this game. And he was bragging about that level of interest in the sport. So that's where we are in 1854. If you went to Boston or Philadelphia, no one would have heard of baseball, even in Connecticut. And 15 years later, 1871, you have baseball is the national pastime. That's what everyone's calling it. And it's played by thousands and thousands of people from coast to coast, north and south. Every city and town of any size has a team, which is pretty amazing when you think about it, the rapid spread of this game. And what else happened in that 15-year period? Well, the game basically stopped to fight the Civil War for almost 5 years. So this is what my book's about. How did this happen? Who were these people? Why did they suddenly get the idea that America should have a national sport? And they took a sport that was incredibly regional and localized and decided that they were going to spread it. And if you read any baseball history book, you'll see that in 1857, there was a convention of the small number of baseball clubs that existed in New York City, a few from Brooklyn. In 1858, they made it an annual thing. And that was the beginning of organized baseball. It was called the National Association of Baseball Players. And it was the governing body of baseball until the first professional league in 1871. So they sort of presided over this national expansion. What's interesting is that they named it the National Association of Baseball Players, and not clubs, and not the New York Association of Baseball Players, the national. In 1858, there was one team that wasn't from New York City or Brooklyn. It was from Elizabeth, New Jersey. So this is a declaration of ambition. And these people, baseball didn't just spread by accident. It was intentionally spread by people. And the best way to understand it, to me, is to understand it as a social movement. Because the people that spread it, 100% amateurs, all of them had lives outside of baseball, some of them very interesting lives. And they were involved in other things. And when you get to know them, as I did, you begin to realize that, early baseball history is full of unanswered questions. In the introduction of my book, John Thorn said, for decades, fans have thought they knew where baseball came from, but experts weren't so sure. Because fans heard the Doubleday story, and I'm sure there's no one on this phone call, on the Zoom meeting, who believes it, but then there's the Cartwright story and the Knickerbocker story, which took its place, and most of us think that that's largely true, and it really isn't. This is where my book starts, with the two origin stories. And what are those about? It's I make an analogy to genealogy. If you're interested in history, you're probably interested in your family history, and I've done a lot of genealogical research, including helping friends. And one of the funny things that you learn doing that is that sometimes the lies are more interesting than the facts. I can give you many examples. I won't bore you with them, but a fact is a fact. Facts are kind of random. But when someone lies about their background, or spins it, or makes up a story about it, they're telling you something about who they are and what their values are and what they believe and what they want you to think. I always knew, and I'm sure most of you know, that the Doubleday story is 100% made up. Not so many people, modern fans, most of them know that it's not true. They may not appreciate how untrue it is, and also how intentionally untrue it is. When I do my baseball tour in Greenwood, this comes up, and people ask me about the Doubleday story or the Cartwright story, and you almost, it's almost hard to explain how untrue the Doubleday story is. And there's always a guy or two at the end of the tour that come up to me and say, I get it that it's made up and it's exaggerated or whatever, but how could it be 100% untrue? And it is hard to believe, but it was made up in 1907. You probably heard the story. I talk about it in my book, but why was it made up? And why does baseball need an origin story of any kind? And it's really a byproduct of this ambition to become a national sport, because this social movement of amateurs who spread baseball and intended to spread baseball, they were selling the game, they were marketing it, and they were marketing it to a sort of a particular part of society. And to understand who they were marketing it to and why and how, you have to take a trip into history and, spend some time in an America that's pretty different. And, that's the area, this is the area where you can get answers to these big questions. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Why did baseball start in cities? I mean, people tend to take it for granted that baseball is some kind of country activity because it takes place in grass and open space, but it started in cities. In early 19th century America and in 18th century America, nobody who worked on a farm or in the country had a minute of leisure. They didn't have the time to play sports, and it never occurred to them. There's haphazard occasions where adults would be in town for July 4th or Election Day, and they might play baseball, which was sort of a return to childhood for them. But there was no organized baseball. There was no clubs. There was no championships. There was no score sheets, umpires, practicing. All that stuff is a byproduct of the leisure that was only available to a small group of people in cities where there was enough prosperity. I don't know. Here's some things probably you've never thought about. Why is a baseball season organized as a series of road trips and home and away series? And we speak of someone winning the series. So why is it organized that way? It doesn't have to be. It could be organized other ways. It's organized that way because most of the early baseball players were volunteer firemen. And they had a template, which was competitions that volunteer firehouses had with each other. And this is still something that you see in the country where there's volunteer firefighting. They would have competitions of firefighting skills. And this sort of shaped early American sports. So you can read in decades before there's any organized baseball, you can read about volunteer fire companies from Brooklyn or New York or New Jersey going to Connecticut, having a water pumping contest, a barbecue, being put up and being treated as guests by a local volunteer fire company, and then the favor would be returned. And this is sort of how baseball was structured early on. The post-game dinner was an essential part of it in the pre-Civil War era. Why are baseball organizations called clubs? Right? They're not clubs in any sense now. The Astros don't admit members and socialize too much. I mean, they work together, but they're paid, and they come from the four corners of the earth. The early baseball clubs were social organizations, all made up of people who knew each other. Why do baseball teams represent cities? The answers to questions like these are in my book. And here's a big one. Why are there fans? Why does anyone care who wins a baseball game? And, we take it so for granted that you can't imagine a world without it, without rooting for a sporting team is just part of our lives, right? Well, the phenomenon literally didn't exist until the late 1850s in Brooklyn. And when it happened because baseball, which was from the mid 1840s to the mid 1850s, played by a handful of clubs, all based in Lower Manhattan, who at a certain point crossed the Hudson to the Elysian Fields in New Jersey simply for space. And they played each other, and no one cared. No one who wasn't in those clubs or a friend of them cared. And there was a little bit of gambling, but there were no spectators, there was no tickets sold, there was no newspaper coverage to speak of. And you can trace, and I do it in the book, when this started to change. And partly, and it's entirely due to the rivalry between Brooklyn and New York. So Brooklyn, which is an up and coming city growing really fast and catching up with New York in every way, and sees itself as a rival to it economically, politically, and in every other way. The first baseball club is founded there in 1854. It's the Excelsiors, the famous Excelsiors with Jim Creighton and Joe Leggett. And they are out and out determined to beat the New York clubs at their own game. And they're followed shortly by the Eckfords, by the Atlantics, and the Putnams. And they become competitive with the New York clubs very quickly. And in 1858, Brooklyn clubs challenged the New York clubs to a best 2 out of 3 all-star series. Nothing like this had ever happened. And we can follow in the newspapers the planning process for this series. They were originally going to have it at the Elysian Fields, which is sort of an open private park. It looks a bit like Central Park. The diamonds are just there. There's no stands, there's no facilities. They weren't used to more than a few dozen people watching. But they began to get the feeling that there was a massive buzz growing among the non-baseball playing public. There was a huge amount of interest, and it was because it was Brooklyn against New York. So it captured the imagination of the general public. And in fact, something like 8,000 or 10,000 people showed up to the first game. Sensing this, they moved the game to a horse racing track in Queens, which was next to a railroad station in Corona, right near where Shea Stadium used to be. And they charged 10 cents admission, more if you had a carriage, because they had to repair the grounds afterward for the horse racing track. And people were completely shocked by how many people showed up. And when you read about this, journalists, people like Henry Chadwick, who you may have heard his name, the first really important baseball journalist who is a big participant in this movement to make baseball a national sport, actively promoting the game. His reaction to these baseball crowds, he's disturbed by them and he's afraid. If you read his stories, you actually laugh out loud if you understand what's really going on, because Henry Chadwick and other journalists, they think that why would thousands of people show up at one of these games who are strangers to the players? And they think it must have something to do with gambling. And they're afraid of gambling. People like Chadwick knew that the key to making selling baseball to the broader country was appealing to the native-born Protestant middle classes, who were a very moralistic group of people. And one of the things that was different about America in pre-Civil War is there's not a lot of immigrants. The first huge immigration is the Irish in the late 1840s and early 1850s, and they have they're not in a position to participate in sports for at least a generation. Everybody in the early baseball clubs pretty much is a native, that we know about, is a native-born white Protestant. And these people severely disapproved of excessive drinking, of gambling. And this is if you read Henry Chadwick's writings, you may have noticed his fierce opposition to anything related to gambling. And he actually says, he's imagining that these ordinary people coming to these Brooklyn, New York games must have bet on the game. It's actually funny. In 1860, the Excelsiors and the Atlantics are playing the series for the championship of baseball. And very quickly, Brooklyn became the center of baseball in terms of competitiveness. And part of it was that Brooklyn had space, but a lot of it was that Brooklyn just, people at the time said that they were under some kind of possession of a baseball mania. People that visited Brooklyn it appeared to them that everybody in the city was playing baseball, men and boys, and that every vacant spot in the city had a baseball diamond laid out in it. And they did have a thriving youth scene. And some of the early baseball clubs, like the Excelsiors and Atlantics, used these youth clubs more or less the way a modern team uses a farm system. They created a kind of ad hoc system of recruiting talent up through the youth clubs, and it became an incredible engine that produced baseball players for generations. Even in the 1870s and 80s, you're seeing a huge amount of baseball talent being exported from Brooklyn to the rest of the country. In 1860, they're playing, the Atlantics and Excelsiors are playing a best 2 out of 3 series, and it's going to the 3rd game. And you may have run across this game if you read any early baseball history, but the crowd was excited, and it was big, and it was a little bit out of control, and the security arrangements weren't great. And the Excelsiors started to get rattled. They didn't like being booed. They didn't like the fans complaining about close calls going against the Atlantics. It was mostly an Atlantic fan crowd. And the captain of the Excelsiors, Joe Leggett, was visibly nervous and started to complain about the crowd behavior and saying if they couldn't get control of the crowd, he was going to walk off the field. And it's interesting that most modern historians kind of look at it through his eyes. And they figure that if he did that, there must have been something going on, things being thrown, players being attacked. The truth is there's no evidence that anything violent actually happened. What I think happened is that the Excelsiors were unnerved by this situation, the way, you know, maybe a high school team would be if they had to walk into a stadium and there were 40,000 people rooting for the other side. They got rattled, and they in fact did walk off the field. And the championship was forfeited to the Atlantics. And this provoked all kinds of controversy and recriminations in the newspaper. And Chadwick took the Excelsior side. And about 2 weeks later, there was an interesting letter written by the president of the Atlantics to the public. And when you read it, it sounds like what a modern fan might say if something like this happened. He's basically saying, look, fans are part of the game now. And if you want to win a championship, you're going to have to play and keep your head in front of tens of thousands of people. And yeah, when they see something they like, they're going to cheer. When they see something they don't like, they're going to boo. And if you can't stand the heat, you should get out of the kitchen. This is what he says in his letter. And he was right. I mean, this is the way baseball was going. Baseball was headed for professionalism at that point, because when fans were interested, it's a matter of time before someone's selling tickets. And in 1862, some businessmen in Brooklyn, interestingly not baseball people, because baseball still believed in amateurism and baseball was still run by people that had no interest in creating an industry or a business. But a leather merchant named William Kammeyer built a ballpark in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, not very far from where I'm sitting here, and charged regular admission. And it was a beautiful facility with stands and concessions and locker rooms and a well manicured field. And he told the baseball clubs, you can use it for free. I'm going to charge the fans. And, you know, it's not hard to imagine the ball is rolling toward professionalism at this point, because it wasn't very long before the clubs began to feel like they were being taken advantage of. Someone else is making money off their competition. So that's a little bit about why I wrote the book and how the book came to be. I think if you're not someone who's an expert in early baseball, you're going to be surprised by, in this 15-year period that I was talking about, by the end of it, how similar baseball is to modern baseball. You know, there's not much new after that point. There's a lot of rules changes, you know, overhand pitching comes in, but modern pitching was invented by an amateur player in Brooklyn named Jim Creighton. He may have thrown a curveball. This is something I discuss in the book. It's hard to tell because people are describing, you know, in words what he's doing, and they don't totally understand it. But by the end of the amateur period, there's not only ballparks and championships, and baseball has gone from being a game played by 90-some people in 1854 to the national pastime played everywhere. There's baseball cards, there's sports coverage in every newspaper. There's players that are national stars. There's all the elements of a modern sport. In my book, I talk about all the things how this social movement that made this happen happened. And most of the people involved in it are people whose names you may never have heard. I met a lot of really fascinating people who were key players in this movement. Well, let me ask if anyone's ever heard of Dr. Joseph B. Jones. Does that name mean anything to anybody?
No.
Joseph B. Jones was a medical doctor, and there were a lot of medical people involved in this movement for reasons that I also will discuss in the book. But there was a public health reform aspect to it. I go into this extensively in the book. But Dr. Jones was one of these drivers of a baseball missionary, a proselytizer. And he takes over the Excelsior's club, the presidency, in 1857. And he has allies that he brings into the club. And we don't have any kind of plan in writing, because there isn't one. But if you watch what he does is he starts to, his goal is very clearly to take the Excelsiors and make them the best team in baseball, and then use them to promote the game elsewhere. So what does he do? He starts recruiting young players, including Jim Creighton, and that's a long, interesting story. He was the greatest star of the amateur era, and he was recruited by the Excelsiors and actually brought across the river from Manhattan. And this is a story that you won't read in too many other books. He merges with other clubs in order to get, say, star catcher Joe Leggett. He gets them through a merger. The best way to understand these amateur clubs is they're a little bit like a country club would be today. Let's say you have country clubs that are competing in golf or tennis or something. Well, they're mostly groups of friends, but you might have, you might want to beat the other club. So you might recruit someone that you knew who was a good player. But there's sort of limits in amateur sports about how far you go with that kind of thing. You don't pay people, you don't steal people from other clubs. So they were sort of on tiptoes. They couldn't go take Joe Leggett from the Waynes when he was the catcher, a great catcher. They merged with the Waynes and they got 3 of their players. They brought Creighton along and played him in some of their associated youth teams that were affiliated with them and brought him along. There were other players that they got jobs for. This is sort of how it was done. And they were also pioneers of training. Dr. Jones was a boxer and gymnast, and they were pioneers of weightlifting, in fact, which was not a common thing in the 1850s. And what did Jones do when he in 2 years, built the Excelsiors into the best club in baseball, or second to the Atlantics at worst? He took them on a tour, and maybe you've heard about these tours. In 1860, he took them up to upstate, to Albany, Rochester, Buffalo. He took them down to Baltimore, 2 years later to Boston. And what was the point of this? I'm just going to rewind a little bit, because I was talking about how America didn't have organized adult sports, and it really didn't. But there were a couple of islands of adult sporting activity, New York being one of them, but Boston had a bat and ball game. It was called the Massachusetts game. And it wasn't as organized as the New York version, but it was popular. And we don't know a whole lot about its early history, but in the late 1850s, there were dozens of clubs playing their game, which was quite different from baseball, but it did involve pitching and batting. Philadelphia had a thing called town ball. And, it's interesting to think about the differences between town ball, the Massachusetts game, and the New York game, because there's a couple of things that are missing from the Philadelphia and Boston games. And one of them is any ambition to spread. They're playing and they're having a good time. The Olympics of Philadelphia go back to the 1830s. They were sort of an island of adult sports, playing among themselves and having a great time. But it never seemed to occur to them to spread the game. And certainly no one watched it in Philadelphia. There were a few people watching the Massachusetts game, but none of them sent clubs on the road to convince other people to play it. And we have descriptions of what it was like when Joseph Jones's team, the Excelsiors, with Jim Creighton pitching and Joe Leggett catching, when they showed up in Baltimore. There's some they whipped the Baltimore team, which was named the Excelsiors. It was actually founded by friends of the Excelsiors, and it's like men playing boys. The reporters for the Baltimore papers say, you know, Creighton threw a pitch and the batter swung at it after it was already in Leggett's hands. And the Brooklyn team wins 51-8. And one of the Baltimore stories says the Baltimore players were convinced that they could have scored a lot more had they wanted to. We have a great description of what happened when the Excelsiors go up to Boston and play on the Boston Common against some of the Massachusetts game players who want to try this New York game. And you can see how what they're impressed by is the athleticism of the Excelsiors. There's something else that the Massachusetts and Philadelphia games don't have. And cricket is sort of in a case by itself because it's an English import, but these were the competitors, potential competitors of baseball, the obstacles to them becoming the national sport. Well, they don't have origin stories. And the point of the origin stories, it's part of the marketing effort. So that kind of explains why the Knickerbockers would be chosen while they were alive and in their prime in the late 1850s as the alleged inventors of baseball and the authors of the first rules and all that other stuff that you'll read in history books. It isn't true. None of it is true. And the people that got up at banquets and toasted the Knickerbockers and said, you're the first club, or the first, they sometimes qualified it, the first organized club or the first club to play modern baseball, the parent club of baseball players, of baseball clubs. It's kind of fascinating to me that there were provably people in the audience of those banquets who knew that wasn't true. And what's going on here is, I remember a marketing expert once told me in a different realm of my life that if you want to sell something, you have to tell a story. And they needed a story. And the story was, you have to have a respectable origin for this game. And the Knickerbockers were an incredibly respectable group of people, respected for all kinds of social and non-sports related reasons. And that's something that I'll refer you to my book to read more about. The Doubleday story, doesn't happen until the professional era, but that's also told for a marketing reason. It's because it's to counter the argument that Henry Chadwick was making that baseball was ultimately derived from an English game called rounders. And, this idea is still kicking around. And I dissent from it. But baseball's being marketed as an American invention. And, we're living in a country where if people decide that baseball is ultimately English, this is fatal. And the 19th century is a very different place. We don't feel a sense of competition and inferiority to the English the way our great-great-great-grandparents might have. And it was central to baseball's marketing effort that it be American. And what's the best way to just shut off this whole debate about the possibility that baseball develops from some English bat and ball game? It's that an American invented it at a particular time and place. And that's the point of both origin stories, ultimately. One more man you've probably never heard of, Colonel Thomas Fitzgerald. Anyone heard of him? So he's a guy whose story I tell at length in the book. He's the founder of the Philadelphia Athletics, the amateur club that becomes a professional club. An absolutely fascinating story. And I tell these stories to explain really how baseball spread out of New York. There were certain patterns to it, certain kinds of people that it appealed to, and how self-conscious baseball was about trying to sell itself to the rest of the country. And then what happens? Well, by the time the outbreak of the Civil War, baseball is extremely concentrated in the Northeast. It's already spread to Philadelphia. It's already spread to Boston. Boston game put up a little bit of a fight. It's spread to New Jersey and Connecticut, and it's spreading to upstate New York, starting to spread to the Midwest. And the only other places it's at is places that have a lot of contact with New York City, like New Orleans and Mobile, Alabama, and Savannah, Georgia, which are tied by transportation and economics. The cotton business was conducted pretty much in the New York's financial district and in New Orleans. It's gone to California with the gold rush already. So there's early clubs in California, some of which are named after the early New York clubs, like the Eagles of San Francisco. But the Civil War comes and it stops baseball. All real organized sports is on a hiatus. People are playing, and people certainly play in the Army, but I have a whole chapter about what the effect was of the Civil War on baseball, and it seems to have finished cricket off. But it's somewhat mysterious how it affected baseball, and I argue that it helped spread it to what they called the West, which is what we call the Midwest. But there was a problem, which was that baseball has this ambition to be national, and what they're worried about is that it'll be rejected by the South. In fact, it was, and the South suffered in the war, and that hurt the spread of baseball. But there was also a sense that baseball was a Northern institution, and you can actually read this in Southern newspapers. There were baseball clubs in the South that refused to join the national organization because it was based in New York. And this has all kinds of interesting implications, which I talk about in my chapter 7, and that is some of them are racial. Another one of the big questions that if you want to find the answer to, you've got to go outside the diamond and look at the lives of the people who started the game and participated in it in the amateur era is, well, how come all the clubs were segregated? Why were they all white? All the clubs we know about. And it's an interesting question because a lot of the early baseball clubs, say in New York and a lot of other places, were actually made up of fervent abolitionists. There were 20-some clubs named Union, and those clubs were almost all founded by passionate supporters of Abe Lincoln and opponents of secession and slavery. It actually never comes up for discussion, the idea of integrating a baseball club. And I've always been kind of fascinated by this. African Americans in Brooklyn and New York and other places were playing baseball. We don't know a lot about them because the white newspapers don't cover it. But there's indications here and there that there's an African American baseball scene. And we also know that in the 1860s, it's quite competitive in the African American side. And that couldn't have come out of nothing. So we know it's coming from somewhere. But when the topic of integration comes up in the late amateur era in the 1860s, and Mr. Fitzgerald, Colonel Fitzgerald of Philadelphia, is right in the middle of it, being a friend of Abraham Lincoln and actually crusader to integrate baseball at that early time. The subject that comes up is, can we allow African American clubs in the National Baseball Organization, and can white and black clubs play each other? But the subject of can a white club sign a black second baseman never comes up, which is another topic that I would refer you to my book for the answer. But it's an interesting fact that tells you something about the amateur era. So I'm speeding through my book here, but the last chapter is about the Red Stockings, the famous Cincinnati Red Stockings, the ones that played coast to coast. In 1869, for the first time, you could actually take the train from the East Coast to the West Coast, and they did it. They didn't wait long. They went to the Deep South, they went to California, they went all over the country. And, at that time, baseball had basically spread to the entire nation. And the Cincinnati Red Stockings undefeated season of 69, they conducted these massive national tours. I call it a victory lap for the success of the movement to make baseball national. And I remember when I started writing this chapter, I had a feeling that I've gotten many times writing baseball history or any kind of history. How in the world am I going to find something new to say about the Cincinnati Red Stockings of 1869? Because that is a very well covered subject. And well, guess what? I did. So if you read that chapter, there are a couple of big surprises in why this team was founded and who was operating and what kind of people they were. And again, over and over again, I found out if you want to know why, you want to know how, the question you have to ask is who? Who were they? why were they doing what they were doing? And often the answer has nothing to do with baseball. I would say in my conclusion, I talk about how this strange phenomenon that we almost, the primarily were fans rather than players. And the game was founded for people to play. And the people that founded it and made it into a national pastime had zero interest in selling a ticket or entertaining people to make money. And they wanted people to play it, and that was the idea. And that they succeeded in getting the country to play. And in fact, if they were around today, they would say, we succeeded, because it wasn't just about baseball. They wanted people to play sports. Baseball was a vehicle for them. And it was the sport that they succeeded in getting people interested in. Some of the same people had tried with other sports, like boxing and gymnastics. And they would be delighted that we have 4 sports, 6 sports, or whatever we have, and that so many people play golf and play tennis and work out, and that they've really changed America's attitude towards sports. But Major League Baseball would be the whole professional apparatus would be beside the point for these people. That wasn't the main point. And I think about how it's easy for us to sort of over-focus on Major League Baseball and professional baseball, and we become sort of passive receivers of marketing, and we're what we're being sold is something that is ours already. It's part of the point of my book. And we made it. Ordinary people did it. Non-professionals created baseball as a national sport, created the sports movement, and it's not something that someone invented to sell to us as entertainment primarily. I will answer some questions now if anybody has any.
I would like to know if the Greenwood Cemetery, are people buried there designated as old ball players, or how did you figure out who was a ball player and who was somebody who just simply had to be buried there?
That's a good question. In many cases, it's hard to tell. You actually have to do some research. There's some people that, have the same names as a ball player, and you have to figure out who they are. I put years of work into this book, but
yeah,
there's a couple of exceptions that are kind of amazing. And if you're ever in Brooklyn, give me a call. I'll show them to you. Henry Chadwick's grave, the great sports writer,
yeah,
is laid out as a baseball field with clay base paths and marble bases with incredible detail. And he has bronze baseball equipment on the obelisk that he's buried under, and a baseball with stitches on top of a big baseball made of granite. Jack Chapman, the famous outfielder, imitated Chadwick's grave. The most beautiful grave there is probably Jim Creighton's. He died at 21 in 1862 when he was the biggest star in American sports. And his grave is full of, instead of upside down torches, which was a normal bit of iconography on a 19th century grave for someone who died young, they're upside down bats. And there's a scorebook and the home plate and a pair of spikes on his grave and a baseball on top on a pedestal. It's absolutely amazing.
What guy is this?
Jim Creighton, the inventor of modern pitching. And there's a whole chapter in my book about this guy because he's incredibly interesting.
Did Chadwick write all the rules initially?
No, he was on the rules committee of the national organization, so he had a lot of influence over rules. But the rules were pretty fluid in the amateur period because the game was getting competitive and new situations kept coming up. Chadwick was the foremost rules authority, and he was sort of the conscience of the game in many ways. So if he disapproved of something like gambling, he had incredible influence in the game. He actually advocated for rules changes. So, but he didn't personally author the rules. There was a rules committee that Chadwick served on, and the rules evolved. But his voice was, I would say, the most important one. Mm-hmm. When just to follow up on Creighton a second, the way baseball pitching worked initially, so in the mid to late 1850s, if you read the early Knickerbocker rules, the first set of rules that we have, which is not the first rules, it's the first ones that we know of. I mean, we know of earlier rules. It's the first one that we have that we can read. It describes what a pitcher has to do. And what it amounts to is, it says you have to pitch the ball, not throw it. And what does that mean? They're pitching it like pitching horseshoes. What we call pitching is what they call throwing. So throwing involves snapping your wrist and really getting something on the ball. That's the way they thought of it. And they said that the pitcher the pitcher would run up to a line and he would throw the ball like you're throwing horseshoes. And the arm had to be directly underhand, dead underhand, perpendicular to the angle of the ground. And you couldn't throw, they said, no jerk or wrist snap of any kind. So just imagine what that would look like. I mean, he's basically serving the ball. I play in a pickup softball game with a bunch of old men, and we sort of have a rule about we pitch in kind of a similar way because it's a hitting game. And I think you can hit about 40, 50 miles an hour if you really put a lot into it. So that's what pitching was like. Now, one other thing, there's no strike zone because you don't need one. You're kind of on your honor as a pitcher to put the ball over the plate. And the batter is on his honor to swing at good pitches. And that's the way the game was in the beginning. What Creighton did was, and it's a little bit of a mystery that I discuss in the book, but he somehow figured out how to get a whole lot more movement and velocity on the ball. And we have some clues about what he was doing, and I discuss it at length in the book, but I'll talk about it for a second. He didn't run up to the line. He took one step. And there's no photo, there's no video or movies, obviously, of him, but there's a couple of photographs and there's some drawings, all of which show that he appears to be twisting his shoulder closed and his hips closed. He puts his left foot, he's right-handed, puts his left foot behind his right foot and kind of uncoils. And this suggests to me that he was throwing a breaking pitch, but it definitely means that he was getting sort of his hip into the ball in a way that other pitchers weren't. And we do have vivid descriptions of batters who couldn't hit him, describing what it was like. And, Pete O'Brien of the Atlantic said, when I first faced him, it was nothing I'd ever seen. He said, the ball's coming out of the ground and it's rising past my shoulder and I couldn't make contact, or if I did, I popped it up. And Chadwick later said, years after Creighton was dead and people would say, oh, that guy throws hard, but he's no Creighton. Chadwick would say, it wasn't velocity. It wasn't velocity. It was command and movement. So that's what modern pitching is. The fact is, and you won't read this in too many history books, but let's imagine this situation that you're a guy who's used to hitting 40-mile-an-hour pitches. Maybe the guy changes speeds or toys with teasing you out of the strike zone, which, well, there isn't one, but teases you to reach for the ball. That's all they're doing. And then a guy comes along who's pitching like an underhand softball pitcher, who's firing the ball, and it has an evil movement on it. It has a deceptive release point. You're being overmatched. In the absence of a strike zone, what would you do? You'd do what they did when they faced Creighton, which is you wouldn't swing. They just waited and watched. And we have pitch counts. We have pitch counts where he threw 89 pitches in an inning.
Good grief.
Yep. Hundreds of pitches in a game. Well, they had to do something about it. So what they did was they started calling strikes as a warning every so often. And of course, the next thing that happened when everyone started pitching like Creighton was pitchers started refusing to throw the ball over the plate. They started calling balls. So, and it took a few years, but the strike zone is a product of the fact that people couldn't handle Creighton's pitching. Now, this is a guy who's not in the Hall of Fame. And what he was doing, we don't know what he was doing, but we know that Henry Chadwick and even Pete O'Brien, who was a captain of the Atlantics, their arch rivals, they looked at it and said it was legal. So whatever he was doing either was legal or it was so deceptive that it looked legal. And
didn't Creighton have a tragic ending that actually involved playing the game?
Yep. Now, there's a story, which isn't true, that's told about Creighton's death. he did die at 21 in 1862, in October of 1862. People at the time didn't entirely understand what happened, but to understand it, you have to understand also that baseball at that early date is still it sees itself as in a rivalry with cricket for the affections of America and for the which one is going to be the national sport. Cricket thought it had a chance in the 1850s to become national, and there were journalists promoting it. And Creighton was playing both sports. Now, we have a pretty good idea of how Creighton died and why, but the public didn't then. What Creighton had was what's called an inguinal hernia, which is in the groin area. And for a while, there were years when people couldn't find a record of his cause of death, but I've seen two records that have, one in the Greenwood Cemetery Archive, and a scholar found one, another scholar, I forgot who, found one that had been misfiled, that said he died of strangulation of the intestine, that's what happens when you have an inguinal hernia and part of your intestine the blood supply gets cut off. And your inguinal hernia is caused by a inherited condition, but it's exacerbated by twisting, extreme physical stress, and weightlifting. All of those things Creighton was doing. Now, add to the fact that his team was full of doctors who knew him very well. And I checked medical books from the time. They understood inguinal hernias extremely well. You begin to suspect that they knew they were working him too hard. But he was the main reason they were winning. I mean, my son played amateur baseball. I don't know if you did or you know anyone who had, but if you can get good hitters out, you have a tendency to be overworked. That may be an understatement. So this is what happened to Creighton. And when he died, there was sort of this ugly dispute over whose fault it was. Baseball blamed cricket, cricket blamed baseball. And I argued that the people who ran the Excelsior certainly knew that neither one of those things was true. So there was a game in which he left in October against the Unions. He left a game ill, and he died a few days later in terrible agony because he had a gangrene infection from his strangulated intestine. But this is something that that developed over years, probably. And so I don't think there was a good faith argument over whether it happened in a cricket match in early October or a baseball match in mid-October. I think that was more of a PR battle.
Yeah. Hi, Tom.
Yeah.
Another historic cemetery is Woodlawn in the Bronx.
Yep.
Where there's a lot of famous people buried there.
True.
LaGuardia, Melville, but also a lot of baseball players. So I was wondering if you had looked at if any
there's nobody
buried there.
There may be some amateur players. There aren't enough that I don't know of any specifically. I think let's see, Woodlawn. I off the top of my head, I don't know any amateur players that are there, but there probably are some. And the thing about Greenwood was, being buried there, it tells you something. It tells you that you were a member of sort of the what we would call upper middle class. They didn't use that term then, but this was the demographic of baseball clubs in the 1850s and 60s. You're talking about not old money aristocrats because they didn't play sports, not working people because they didn't have time for sports. They're sort of the merchants, the lawyers, the doctors, the engineers, the prosperous people, financial service industry people, and they tended to bury their dead in Greenwood, whether they lived in New York or Brooklyn or even outside the city. And Woodlawn at that point was very far from New York City. There are a couple of Catholic players. There aren't many, and you can find them in some of the Catholic cemeteries, but it's actually was shocking to me what a high percentage of amateur players are native-born Protestants.
Hey, Tom. Jeff Cohen here. How are you?
Yeah. Hi.
I want to ask you, what was Doc Adams' influence in the game?
Well, I don't know. I might annoy Doc Adams for the Hall of Fame people, but I never say anything about that because I don't really agree with it, to tell you the truth. Doc Adams is an important, really important member of the Knickerbocker Baseball Club. And he was chairman of the National Association Rules Committee for many years, I think 6 in a row. And if you think that kind of thing is important, you know, you could credit him with 9 innings and 9 men to a side. But I tend to look at these things from a little different perspective. And actually, it's kind of funny. I said in my book, which is probably, I wrote these words 1.5 years or 2 years ago. I said, rules are rules, you know, and if you're interested in the early history of the game, they're so changeable that they don't appear to be as sacred as they do to a modern person. You know, I know a lot of people that are, you know, furious about the DH. They're furious about 7-inning double headers. To me, that's no big deal because I've seen bigger changes than that in the game in the early days. And I think I actually said in my book, honestly, what difference would it have made if it was 7 innings or 9 innings? That was a big dispute at the 1857 convention. I didn't realize that baseball was about to give us 7-inning games. But I sort of feel like it's not that they're unimportant. I feel like their importance is exaggerated because that's not, you know, the point of baseball is not 7 or 9, 9 players or 10 players. That's not what the phenomenon's really about. I don't sort of attach that much magic to those things. So I'm telling you what I really think. I think Doc Adams, you could argue, I mean, if you were going to have an amateur baseball Hall of Fame, let's put it that way. There's almost none of these people in my book are in the Hall. The only one really is Chadwick. Some of them went on to pro careers, so they got into the Hall of Fame. But like Al Reach, you know, a great amateur player, but he's in there because he founded the Phillies. But in terms of on amateur performance, Jim Creighton not being in the Hall of Fame is kind of hard to stomach for someone that really knows how important he was. But that's the thing. The Hall of Fame is a creature of professional baseball, and Creighton wasn't a professional. I think the short answer is Major League Baseball is just not that interested in anything that happened before 1871. If you had an amateur Hall of Fame, I was going to say Doc Adams would be in it because he's an important player. I mean, he was a good athlete and an important player. But I think his importance is a little bit exaggerated to me.
Actually, I think
first.
Creighton was
Thank you.
a professional. Excelsior's paid him to come over and play for them from another team.
Well, you know, those are fighting words there. I read my book and read my argument that he wasn't a professional.
Oh,
I mean, here's the thing.
Book.
Excuse me?
the book.
Tell us the name of the book and tell us where we get it.
It's called How Baseball Happened. And if you go to howbaseballhappened.com, that's my website, and there's links there to buy it, and you can get it on pretty much anywhere. But there's a lot of discussion in there about the idea of professionalism versus amateurism. And the thing about Creighton is, I mean, it's complicated. And, you know, the truth is, I feel like modern historians tend to kind of go back in time and oversimplify it. So, yeah, Creighton actually did get paid with a no-show job for 1 season. And the real question is, like, according to the values of the time, was that really a violation of the amateur ethic or not? And it's a complicated question because everything's changing in this 15-year period. So there are things that in 1858 were okay, that in 1848 were not okay. But the short answer to sort of help you wrap your mind around it for me is, you can read in my book my long argument about this, but and there were other players that have been accused retrospectively of being hypocrites and being cheaters because they got paid, like Al Reach. Interestingly, in their time, they weren't. And I think that should give people a little bit of pause there, because there were players who were accused of violating the amateur ethic, and there were others that weren't. And I think there's a possible explanation for it. But one thing I say to people when I'm having this discussion is, on one level, on the top of your head, maybe it seems obvious who's an amateur and who's a pro. But where's the line between amateurism and professionalism now? And is it changeable? And the answer is, it's not a clear line, and it's very changeable, right? I mean, I'm in my early 60s, and I remember when, you know, NBA players wouldn't be allowed in the Olympics. That'd be ridiculous. So outreach was in different sports and in different countries, there's different attitudes toward what's a violation of amateurism and what isn't. We support Olympic athletes with lodging, training, sometimes stipends. Is that a violation? Are they professionals or not? It's not a simple question. And I try to sort of look it up from the values of the time. And the truth is that no one actually accused the Excelsiors of breaking any amateur ethic with Creighton. Well, they did with other players. And I'll make you buy my book to find out why I think that.
Tom?
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask you a question. Remember as a kid reading through what was known as Big Mac, Macmillan Encyclopedia, and being fascinated by one particular player. His name was Nate Birkenstock. He was from Philadelphia, and he played in one professional game in 1871 when he was 40 years old.
Yeah, he was a real good hitter, power hitter, and a member of the original Athletics that were founded by my friend Colonel Fitzgerald that I talked about. And there's a whole mystery story about him in the book because he sort of appears out of nowhere, and I found out where he'd come from, and it has relevance to baseball. But yeah, Birkenstock was a Philadelphia guy, and Philadelphia really switched almost suspiciously quickly to baseball. I don't really know why. I mean, Boston put up more of a fight. But when New York baseball came down to Philadelphia, the clubs just switched in droves over like an 18-month period. The Athletics were founded playing town ball in 1859. A year later, and Birkenstock is on the team, they switched to baseball. And Philadelphia, what's interesting is to look at the National League, National Association in the early 1870s, the National League starting in 76, and then the professional leagues, the major leagues of the 1880s, to look at where these people came from, because that tells you where there was baseball infrastructure. Philadelphia is the second most common source for baseball players to New York and Brooklyn.
Oh, that was
I thought
terrific.
you were going to say you were fascinated by death to flying things, Mr. Chapman.
Oh, Bob Ferguson.
Well, Ferguson is alleged to have that nickname. There's an argument over whether they were both called that or it's a mistake. I don't understand why they'd call Ferguson death-defying things. It's really hard to find a contemporary citation for either of them. But so I'm not going to weigh in on that, but I'll say that Chapman was a great outfielder, and they played barehanded. And I would love to go back in time and see a game that ends on a diving catch in deep left center field by a center fielder that's not wearing gloves. I mean, that had to be exciting.
Okay, Tom, wonderful job. Really appreciate it. Your time and your expertise. I guess we could go on for quite some time, but
I certainly could.
We'll invite you back if you would like. We'd love to have you come back.
I will. I'd be delighted.
Thank you so much. And I think you'll have quite a few people buy your book. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, I hope they enjoy it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tom.
You got it. I want to move right on to our next guest, Brian McTaggart, who works for Major League Baseball TV and MajorLeagueBaseball.com. He's lives in Houston, and he covers the Astros extensively. But you've all seen him on TV, and he's blessed us by being a guest a couple of times for our SABR meetings. And we've asked him to kind of bring us up to date on what is taking place in Major League Baseball today. I'm not sure if Brian is at Houston or in Florida, but I'll let him tell you. Brian, are you there?
Yeah, good. Good evening, guys. How y'all doing?
Fine.
I'm here in Houston at least for a couple more weeks. We sort of cut back the amount of days we're going to travel to spring training, so I'm covering it via Zoom. That exciting Zoom. So every morning about 7:45, I have breakfast with Dusty Baker on Zoom, and then after the workouts, we get access to a few players, and so that's how I'll be doing it here for the next couple of weeks. But I'm going to go down to West Palm Beach on March 9th and be there for the final 3 weeks.
Oh, good.
So everybody reported today, I guess. Did Greinke also show up, to your knowledge?
I don't think he's there. What we were told last week is he's not going to come until Friday, and I think there's still a handful of guys out. I mean, they have this COVID intake testing that takes a while, and I think that's holding up 2 or 3 players. There's always 1 or 2 players that has a visa issue, and I think they have some of those as well. I think Pedro Leon is one of those, the Cuban player they signed about a month ago. I don't think he's in camp yet, but it's early. It's only February 22nd, so plenty of time for those guys to come in. But I think Greinke's going to come like he did last year at the very final report date, which is February 27th, which I think is Friday. So they're not worried about it. I mean, he's 36. He's working out at Rollins College in Orlando, and he'll drive down when he's ready. And that's just what you get when you get Zach Greinke. He just sort of does his own thing.
Yes, Dusty. Go ahead. Hey, Tony. Tony?
How does Dusty look?
Dusty?
Yeah.
I tell you what, Dusty, he looks really good. I mean, for I think he's 71, and he was talking the other day about how he doesn't feel 71, and that his father told him that no matter how old you are, don't let the old man in. He said, don't start walking slouched over. All these things that he tries to not do every day to make himself feel young. And a couple of weeks ago, he did get the second COVID vaccination. As you know, Dusty has had some health problems in his life. He's a cancer survivor. He's had some heart problems. I think that was a couple of decades ago. So he was able to get both doses. So he's out there with got the vaccines out of the way, and he's on his feet. He moves around, and he's got the bat, and he's got the wristbands, which I think he puts on first thing in the morning. And I don't know if he does a toothpick anymore because he wears a mask now. But last year when I was down there, I asked him about the toothpick, and he pulled out the specific brand of toothpicks he uses and why he uses them. And getting to know Dusty has been a real pleasure. I can see why everybody likes him.
Oh boy.
Tags, what is your reading on the Forrest Whitley situation?
Yeah, that's a tough one, Brownie. I mean, it's been like, 2-3 years now of just lost years. I mean, they had to add him to the 40-man roster this year, and this is going to be a big year for him. I mean, he's 23 years old. Last year he was at the alternate side, and no one really says exactly what happened. I don't know if it was an injury per se, but they would have called him up at one point. I mean, look at some of the pitchers they called up. They were calling up guys who had not pitched above Class A ball, Luis Garcia and guys like that, because they just needed arms. And Forrest Whitley would have been in the big leagues last year had he been ready, and he was not ready. But I think it's time for him to grab the bull by the horns. I mean, it seems like he's constantly tinkering with things with his mechanics. I don't know if he's doing that this year yet. I haven't had a chance to visit with him yet, but certainly at some point the Astros are going to need him to step up and become the kind of pitcher that they expected when they drafted him. But whether it's injuries or the suspension or last year losing the entire season, if you would have told me at 23 years old that he still would not be in the big leagues, I certainly would have said that wouldn't be a good sign for him. And it's not, but not time to give up on him yet. He's still got great stuff, and this will be a big year for him to try to get his feet under him.
About the outfield.
Well, talked to Miles Straw today via Zoom, and he was really excited about, like it or not, he's going to be the guy that takes over for George Springer. He's not George Springer. He's a totally different player, but he's got a chance to be a better defensive player. I think the way a scout told me is that Springer's ceiling, as far as defense, could be Miles Straw's floor. He's that good, could be that good defensively. He's still got to improve some things. He's faster, obviously. He's got a better arm, gets better reads and jumps. So if he puts it all together, he could be great out there. He doesn't have to go out there and beat Springer, but we asked him what he needs to do more than anything, and he said 3 words: get on base. Yes. And that's his goal this spring, is to get on base. He wants to be more aggressive in counts, get on base. I know he wants to steal a ton of bases and wreak some havoc. No matter, I don't know where they plan to hit him right now, but so you'll have Brantley in left, you'll have Miles Straw in center, and then you'll have Kyle Tucker in right field. And the backup outfield, right now it looks like it'll either be the rookie Chas McCormick or maybe Steven Souza Jr., who they signed to a non-roster. Jose Siri, another non-roster guy. who's in camp as well. So not a lot of depth beyond those three starters, but if Miles Straw can get better at bats and get on base, I mean, I think he's a guy with his wheels who could wreak some havoc if he gets on base.
Does he strike out a lot, or does he put the bat on the ball?
Yeah, he strikes out a little bit too much. They want him to be a little more aggressive and look for his pitch earlier in counts and put the ball in play a little bit more. I don't know if you remember, there was a game in Oakland in 2019, late in the season, to where I think he got on base with a couple of infield hits, maybe had another hit, stole 3 bases. I think maybe scored on a squeeze. He just wreaked havoc with his legs, and that's the kind of player they need him to be. But to be able to use your speed, you got to get on base, and he did not get on base at all last year.
Yeah. You say you can't steal first base.
Cannot steal first base. No, they're changing a lot of rules, but not that one yet.
Max, what would the plan be if he couldn't play? It seems that they're dangerously thin in center field.
Yeah, they're very thin in center field. I mean, you're looking at, Chas McCormick maybe. I mean, Tucker's played some center. I don't know if you'd put him out there and move, Souza to one of the corners. But yeah, you're right. There really is no backup plan at this point. Pedro Leon is a center fielder who they say is going to be a quick mover, but this is a guy who's barely played any professional ball. Still, there's not a lot known about him. I mean, he's going to have to go to AAA to begin the year, and then maybe he's up next year. But right now they're flying with Miles Straw and seeing what he can do. I mean, there's always a chance you could go and make a trade or acquire somebody.
Yeah.
But certainly that's going to be, I think, the biggest storyline going through the spring is seeing how Straw's coming along and if he's progressing.
Are there free agents who are likely to pop up?
Well, the only one really out there that you keep hearing about, and you heard about his name early on, is Jackie Bradley Jr. But I don't think the Astros, from what I've been hearing, aren't really in any position to sign anybody else like that. They're up against the luxury tax threshold, which they do not want to go over. So unless Jackie Bradley Jr. gets desperate and takes some sort of cheap deal or something. But I just don't see that. I wouldn't completely rule it out, but I think this is the team right now that they're going to have.
What is the situation in your brain with Carlos? Obviously, there's going to be a lot of money on paper coming off the roster next year. So it seems to me, and this is me talking, that there's no real reason why they shouldn't try to get something done before the season starts to keep him here. Money would be here.
I agree, Greg. Yeah, I mean, you got the 2 big pitchers coming off the books, and Greinke and Verlander. McCullers is a free agent as well. And Carlos, today we talked to him on Zoom for a while, and I was asking him the questions about his contract situation, and I mean, he was great. He was very open and honest. And I don't know if you saw the story or not, but he said that if I'm going to get a contract extension with the Astros, it has to be done before the start of the regular season. He just does not want it hanging over his head when the regular season starts, which makes sense. So, but he also said that he hasn't heard from the Astros since he got his contract done a couple of weeks ago to avoid arbitration. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch in the next 5 weeks. But if I'm the Astros, I do what I can to extend Carlos Correa. He's going to be 27 years old as a free agent. Springer, was 31, 32. I still think there's another level that Correa hasn't hit. I'd like to see him stay healthy over a 162 game season. He developed into a tremendous defensive player. And I think we saw what kind of leader he became last year, not only spring training when he was sort of the voice of the sign stealing scandal, but remember in the playoffs, he got Framber Valdez's face a little bit, and he's really become the leader of this team. And I think losing him would be pretty catastrophic.
There was a great, I thought, public relations move. But Altuve and Correa purchased thousands of meals for youngsters in Houston after this horrible week we've experienced. So it was a wonderful thing for them both. Really terrific for the club and for the community, I think.
Yeah, several of those guys stepped up too. Bregman organized some water drives. I think Joe Smith and Michael Brantley got involved in that as well. And it was great to see. I mean, say what you will about what happened in 2017 and the trash can banging, but these are some guys with some big hearts, and they give back all the time. And Bregman is up near the top of that list. He's constantly out there in the community giving back, and I think Houston's lucky to have him.
What do you think about the Tatis signing?
Well, that is wow, that's a lot of money. Really unprecedented. Interesting how they structured it, where I think he gets $1 million this year, and then what 5, 7, 9, and then a couple of years he's getting 32 million. But hey,
How old is he now?
He's 22, so they'll have him through his age 36 season, and I like that better than some of these other deals that we saw when the $100 million contracts get signed out. And the Albert Pujols one, which we all knew the last few years of that would be rough, and they are for the Angels, and he's entering the last year of that. So you got to think at 36 years old, Tatis will at least still be young enough to be a productive player. And that's a long way from now. There's a lot of wear and tear on the body. Will he be? Who knows? But boy, I'm just shocked that a team is spending that kind of money. But man, the Padres are. They're young and they're brash, and they're going to give the Dodgers the run for the money in that division.
It's better than that Soriano signing too.
Yeah, Soriano. Yeah, there's a lot of those that did not turn out so well for sure. And I guess we'll see in 15 years, look back and see where Tatis winds up.
But that 400-pound Tatis, he moves on the field.
Hey, Brian, I had a question for you. I heard that, I read somewhere that Bregman said either today or yesterday that he didn't even feel like this was a season, that last season really counted, and he's really looking forward to a 162-game season. Is he the only Astro player that maybe feels like last year he didn't really feel like it was a season?
Yeah, he did say that today. He says he just felt like they didn't play a season. They were off 4 months and then 60 games. And I tell you what, the Alex Bregman we saw today and just interacting with him seemed like a totally different guy than a year ago. I don't think it can be understated how a year ago at this time when they were reporting to camp and dealing with the fallout of the sign stealing scandal, it was weighing on those guys big time. And it really took its toll on Bregman. I know that for a fact. I think it really took its toll on Altuve. But today, Bregman looked like a guy who was carefree, and he even admitted a little bit last year he wasn't in the right physical shape, which is why he added 27 pounds to allow him to drive through the ball a little more. But he also said he wasn't in the right mental shape last year either, and it weighed on him hard. And so, if you're a fan of the Astros, you got to hope that these subpar regular seasons that all these guys had that maybe it was more mental than everything else. But Bregman seemed very happy, very loose, and very excited about the upcoming season.
Well, if that's really the case, if a lot of these players felt that way and we were still only one game from the World Series, I mean, what does that say? What does that say about this club?
Yeah, well, to me, I told people in September last year, they were just sleepwalking. Every game was the same. They would lose 5-2. It was just not good baseball. And I thought they would get beat by the Twins. And then I thought they would get beat by the A's, but I don't know what happened. A switch came on. Correa played at a level that way above what he played in the regular season. Altuve came alive, Bregman a little bit. It's almost like they were bored or no fans in the stands. It was boring, but so I think that's encouraging. And Correa, if you remember in the playoffs last year, said he made some adjustments with the swing, and he feels he's carried that over now, and he hopes to carry that in the regular season, which would be huge for the Astros. And it can't hurt in a free agent year if he doesn't sign with the Astros.
Yeah.
Have that hanging over your head as well.
Have they decided about fans in the stands yet or in spring training?
Yeah, they are selling tickets. They're going to sell, I believe they're selling limited amount of tickets in pods. So I'm not sure, the number of fans, but fans will not be allowed on the back fields. I don't know if you've ever been down there, how you can go on the back fields and watch the guys do their drills, but that's out the window this year. But limited number of fans can still come to the games. And in the regular season, I think the Astros are planning to have about a quarter capacity to start the season, which 10,000-12,000 fans. So that'll be nice to get some atmosphere back in that building.
They'll need the revenue too.
And they need the revenue for sure. Yeah.
How does Castro look?
Haven't really had a chance to see him yet. Was able to talk to him, and I think they're in a great situation with their catchers. With Maldonado and Castro, I was looking up the other day. That tandem, they have the third most experience of any catching tandem in the big leagues right now. One's a lefty, one hits right-handed. So I think they're in really good shape just with the leadership and what they bring behind the plate. So Maldonado did a really nice job last year. but he started like what 46 out of 60 games, almost every game in the playoffs. That's a big
Yeah.
workload. You can't keep that pace up over 162 games. So
How do they rank in percentage of throwing out runners?
who's that? Castro?
Castro and Maldonado, they're
Yeah.
both near the top, aren't they?
I don't know. I'd have to look that up. I mean, I know Maldonado's got a cannon for sure. I'm not sure, where Castro ranks these days. I'd have to
Castro
look.
used to be over 40%.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, he was a pretty good catcher there for a couple of years. I mean, I know he doesn't really hit much anymore, but the catching position, especially with this lineup, I mean, you don't need that. I mean, it'd be nice to have it. There's just not a lot of JT Realmuto
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
So, I think they've definitely upgraded at catcher over what they had last year.
What about our DH? Is he able to run and play?
Yeah, he was on the field today on the video that I saw, and it looks like he's completely 100% healthy. I have no idea if they plan to get him in the outfield a little bit. I mean, that's probably a question I might ask Dusty tomorrow when I talk to him at 7:45. But yeah, he looked good. And Correa was talking today about watching him take batting practice, and Correa said that Alvarez looks sexy. I don't know what that means in baseball terms, but I guess it's good, right?
Oh.
So having him back, I mean, that's like getting a free agent signing, because he only played 2 games last year. So
Yeah.
having him for the whole year, and if he performs at the level like he did in 2019,
Oh my.
that's a huge addition.
Oh
Hey,
my.
Brian, what was Carlos's comments about moving to third base? Was he just marketing himself a little bit? I just heard bits and pieces of that.
Yeah, he sort of brought that up himself. He was marketing himself. I think he was sort of comparing himself against the other free agent shortstops that could be in the offseason. As you know, there could be about 4 or 5 pretty elite shortstops. Lindor, one of them, Seager, Trevor Story, who are free agents this offseason. And he was sort of saying that, hey, I'm the youngest one of that group, and I might be the only one who could, make a seamless transition over to third base, if you give him a 10-year deal or whatever, maybe later in his career. So he was selling himself pretty good today. He was laying out the reasons why the Astros should extend him and what he can bring to the table.
Yeah.
And one thing we heard from Correa that we never heard at any point from Springer was that he wants to be an Astro, and he likes it here. He wants to finish his career here, and he hopes the Astros feel the same way.
Yeah.
Never got that sense with George. It always seemed like when George hit free agency that he was going to leave, and that's exactly what happened.
Were you surprised that Brantley decided to stay with us?
Well, yeah, based on the reports, he was going to Toronto there for a little while, and then he came back. But I thought it was pivotal that they signed one of those 2 guys. I really didn't think they could afford to lose both Brantley, and Springer. And if I had to guess, it turned out the way I thought it would have happened. They would lose Springer and re-sign Brantley. So, yeah, having him back's huge. I mean, y'all, you've seen him play. What kind of professional hitter he is, and just a guy that puts the bat on the ball and gives you real professional bats. So, yeah, well, once they got him back, I think it helped, make the sting of losing Springer a little bit better, and it helped really, I think, put the bow back on their off season a little bit, because before that, other than adding a couple of relief pitchers, they really hadn't done a whole lot. But he's going to be good. They couldn't afford to lose him.
That's great. That's great.
Talking about losing Springer, as a fan, when he came up, the whole attitude of the club changed. They started playing baseball. They quit dragging. He brought all the fun to the clubhouse. He was the guy that brought the spirit in, and then Altuve and Correa picked up that spirit. I'm just wondering how the clubhouse is going to be now that he's gone. He embraced Reddick's wrestling belt and all this stuff, and he was really the heartbeat of the club, even when he was on the injured reserve several times. So
yeah, he was. And you're right. I mean, when he got called up, it sort of represented like a benchmark moment. I think that, the rebuild's over and the new guys are here, and here they are. And then McCullers came, and then Correa and Bregman, and, that homegrown core that they had. Altuve was already here. But, right from the beginning, Springer was the guy with the parties in the clubhouse after games and that sort of thing. But, I think, since then they've developed a very good culture there now. They have a lot of leaders. Correa's up there as one of the leaders. Altuve quietly has become one of the leaders. I think Verlander did wonders being in there for the things that he was able to do leadership wise. McCullers has grown into a leader in the clubhouse. So, I think they've come a long way culture-wise from where they were in 2013. And when Springer got called up, it was really they were in search of somebody to be a leader, and he took on that role. But I think they're in a lot better place now. It's a veteran club. The guys that came up around that time have been together now for a while and been up for 4 or 5 years.
Thank goodness they aren't the Texans or the Rockets.
Yeah.
It just seems to me that people are looking so much forward to the season, and it looks. I hate to put a jinx on anything, but the vaccine really seems to be having the desired effects. The cases are going down, so maybe we're headed to more or less a normal season, which would be heaven on earth.
It would be, yeah. If we could get to the All-Star break and maybe have an All-Star game with fans and hit the second half of the season with full capacity. I think everybody obviously would be a fan of that for sure. But having some fans in there to start the season, I think is going to be great because it was really weird. I went to most of the home games last year, and it was really weird playing in an empty ballpark. Just did not feel right. And the pumped-in music, the pumped-in noise, why I think you almost had to have it because it was so quiet in there.
Yeah.
It was still very weird, and you need fans cheering and you need fans chanting, and it looks like we're going to get some of that.
Well, unfortunately, we're probably going to have some of the alternate too in visiting ballparks. I think people are still going to boo a little bit, a whole lot.
Yeah, but I mean, how many guys are left from that World Series team? The entire infield, and that's pretty much it. I mean, McCullers. So, but yeah, 4 of the key players on the infield. But how's Springer going to get received in other parks? It seems like whenever a player that was on the 2017 Astros goes somewhere else, he's immune to any of the booing or the backlash. Marisnik got cheered in spring training last year and with the Mets. Trying to think of some other cases, but I'm sure when Springer maybe goes to Yankee Stadium, he'll get booed, but he's not going to feel the same amount of ire that he would have had he stayed with the Astros. And maybe that's one of the reasons he wanted to move on to distance himself from it a little bit.
Where is Marisnik? Is he still with the Mets?
Cubs. Signed with the Cubs.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Brian, what about the rotation?
Well, as of now, it's pretty much set in stone, and Greinke, McCullers, Framber Valdez, Jose Urquidy, and Christian Javier. But the depth drops off real quick because I think we all know with going from a 60-game season to 162-game season, the workloads on these pitchers are going to be monumental, big leap forward. Framber Valdez, pitched 71, 72 innings last year. Can he pitch 180? What kind of injuries are we going to see? So, I would be a little bit worried about their starting pitching depth. I mean, they have some minor leaguers that might have to come up and get some innings. Is Whitley going to be ready to assume one of those roles? But they're going to get a shot. But I think with the 5 guys they have on paper, they feel pretty good about it. It's a young group at the bottom that has some promise, but over 162 game season, they're going to need more than those 5 guys.
Yeah.
I think that could be a little bit of a concern.
I am reading where some clubs are actually going to go with 6-man rotations, at least to start the season, for that very reason, that the shake from going to 60 games to 162, they think is going to be too much.
Yeah, I haven't heard that about the Astros.
Back by the end of the year, or is that not going to happen?
I don't think so. I mean, he had the surgery in August, so 12 months. You're looking at. He had it in September,
shorter, but you're probably right. So.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he comes back in the playoffs, but I don't know if he'd want to do that heading into free.
No, that would be weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jim Creighton told us last month that he would not expect to see Verlander at all this season.
Yeah.
Might pitch a minor league game or something, but not in the league time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you think Mike Fiers will be received by the Houston fans?
I don't know. I mean, I'm looking here that the Astros play 7 of their first 9 games against the A's, so I guess they could still slot him in their 5th starter, and he would still miss the Astros. But I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever see him on the field at Minute Maid Park again because they clearly went out of their way last year to avoid that.
Yeah,
I'm surprised he's still with the A's.
Yeah, they re-signed him. So yeah, I would love to see them face him, but it's just I don't think the A's are going to allow that to happen.
Brian, I was interested in your interview on The Athletic with Allison and the other MLB correspondents at the National American League West, and all the others felt the Astros were the team to beat.
Yeah, I mean, I
I don't
think
know
there
what
are
our competition is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, the A's have gotten worse. I mean, they lost their closer Hendricks. I mean, they just signed Rosenthal, but they lost Simeon, Chris Davis, Tommy LaStella, Robbie Grossman. You know, they've suffered some losses. You know, they're just not as good as they were last year. You know, I think the team that could finish second might be the Angels. I hate to pick the Angels because they always seem to let me down if I pick them, but you know, they have a pretty nice lineup. Ohtani is going to be back to being a two-way player. Do they have enough starting pitching? That's going to be the big question. I just don't see any team on paper really, you know, chasing the Astros. I mean, I think they should win the division pretty easily. I mean, I see them winning, you know, 92, 93, 94 games, winning the division by 6-7 games. I'd be really surprised if they didn't win the division, frankly.
It will be interesting to see how AJ Hinch does with Detroit. And of course, we'll play them a few times too.
Yeah, they play them. Yeah, I was just looking at that. But yeah, I mean, they're a little bit in a rebuild mode, the end of a rebuild mode. So I think they're maybe, you know, what the 2014 Astros were. So, you know, maybe in 2 or 3 years, AJ will have them in the playoffs. But I'm a big AJ Hinch fan. He was tremendous to work with for us. And, you know, I hated that he got fired. And I was super jealous of the Detroit beat writers when he got hired because, boy, he really knew how to take care of the media. And so, you know, not that Dusty's Dusty, and you know he's been fun to cover, but I can't imagine ever covering a manager that gets what we do more than AJ Hinch.
Yeah.
So I hope he does well.
I think it's probably a pretty good sign that Lunau's lawsuit against the Astros was settled out of court.
Yeah. So yeah, he was
that may make for smooth sailing on different fronts.
Yeah. Yeah, Astros had a lot of lawsuits thrown their way in the last 5 or 6 years. So it seems like every month someone's filing a lawsuit against the Astros. So
yeah,
we'll see.
The
Go ahead. Any more questions for Brian?
I'm just going to ask one last. The commissioner's report about the so-called scandal talked about the culture inside the Houston front office. Who knows what that means? But is there any indication that whatever problem there was has been resolved one way or another?
I think it's changed. I think there was definitely a culture issue, and I think we saw that in the playoffs a couple of years ago with you know, the Brandon Taubman situation with the female reporters. That stuff's not going to happen anymore, and I don't think it's going to be tolerated by the new management and new general manager. But there definitely was a culture issue. There was. How can I put it? It was sort of, you know, we're better than you are. You know, your opinion doesn't matter. You're an outsider. You know, we don't care. It was very cutthroat, and that permeated in the front office and the organization. And I think things have certainly got better with James Click and some of the people that he's brought in, and frankly, some of the people who aren't there anymore. And and I'd be surprised if that becomes an issue again.
Thank you.
Speaking of Springer, Toronto's put together a pretty interesting team, I think, along with the Twins. And I was just wondering your comments on those two teams.
Yeah, I love Toronto. I mean, all those young players they have and all the Houston connections with Biggio and Gurriel and now Springer's over there. They're going to be fun to watch. I like the Twins, too. I'll tell you who I really like in the AL Central is the White Sox. I mean, I know a lot of people are picking the Twins. I think the White Sox are the team to beat in the AL Central. So I think that's going to be a fun division race as well. AL is going to be tough. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You got those two teams in the AL Central I mentioned, and then in the East, you know, you got the big boys over there, Yankees, and, you know, the Rays aren't going away. Blue Jays have gotten better. So then you have the Astros in the West. So, you know, I think the wild card.
Who are you picking in the East?
In the East, I'd probably pick the Yankees.
Oh.
Yeah, I think on paper, the Yankees are probably the best team. You know, the Rays, I think, are going to be in the mix, but I just don't see the Rays winning the division again over 162 games. But the Yankees have to stay healthy. You know, they have all these injured guys. I know that Stanton and Judge are doing yoga, so maybe that'll be the difference. Who knows?
Hey, Brian, what do you think Dusty and the coaching staff's going to do if they can't trust Presley to close games?
Well, they've mentioned about they feel comfortable with some of the other options. I know that I think Dusty mentioned that Baez could do it. There's some belief they could throw a couple of the lefties out there. I don't think they're real worried about it. They feel they have options to get the last 3 outs, or they feel they have enough depth in the bullpen, I guess, to finish games. And ideally, it would have been nice if they would have went out and signed a closer. I know they tried to get Trevor Rosenthal. He wanted 3 years, and Astros offered 2, and he ended up signing for 1, which is kind of strange. But yeah, in a perfect world, they go out and I know they went after Hendricks, and he got a 3-year deal. So, but I feel good about their bullpen. If I was the Astros, I mean I think they've improved it, quite a bit. I think Stanek's going to be an under the radar guy. Last year I think you throw that out the window like you do, a lot of guys. But Baez has been solid for a long time, and Cishek, non-roster guy, throws down low, side armor. I think he could be intriguing as well, and he's a guy that has 132 career saves, so he could be an option to close as well. But talking to Ryan Presley a couple of days ago, and he feels back to what he was in 2019. He just says he was out of sorts all last year and just did not feel healthy. And he, if they can get the 2019 Ryan Presley, then you feel good about putting him anywhere.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Brian, were you surprised that the AAA season's going to start in April, or is it part of the deal where you're going to have players going back and forth a lot this first couple of months?
No, I was happy. Basically, I don't know if you've paid attention to the way it's working, but the Astros have 72 players in camp, right, in the Major League camp, which is pretty much their Major League club and the AAA club. And so the pitchers are using the Major League clubhouse in West Palm Beach, and the position players are using the minor league clubhouse, and they're spread out. And so, once they leave at the end of March, then all the rest of the minor leaguers are going to come in, and they're going to train there all April. And that's why the AA and below seasons are starting in May, is because you're going to have this staggered spring training with the AA and lower guys, won't be in spring training until April. But I was really thrilled that minor leagues are back, and I heard there might be AAA only, but it looks like the AA and below are going to play 120 games. AAA is going to play 142 games. That's great. You just can't afford to lose another season of the development for these guys. And the Sugarland Skeeters are right down the road. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. You can go out there and see Whitley and find out why he's not up yet. Maybe yell from the stands.
Do you think we might see you out in Sugarland?
Well, I'll definitely be out there if I can. Yeah, I'll make a point to go out there. If there's if one of those guys is out there on a rehab assignment or a big prospect is pitching, I'll try to.
According to Deacon Jones, they've spent like $20 million improving that stadium.
Yeah, they had to improve the clubhouses and the dugouts, and I think they had to do something with the outfield walls. So it wasn't.
Resided the whole field with the same stuff they have in Minute Maid.
Yeah, it wasn't quite AAA caliber, but it will be in April when it starts.
Have they decided if they're going to have fans in the stands, or?
That I don't know. I've not heard about
what
leagues.
Percentage fans in the stands?
No, I haven't heard.
They're selling season tickets. I've got the notification. They're already selling season tickets, and they're reasonable. The prices are pretty good for AAA.
I think a lot of people are going to go there, and it's expensive to go to a big league game. Even if you sit in the outfield, if you have a family, so that'd be a good spot to go and get to see some of these younger guys.
Who's got the Round Rock franchise?
Rangers.
Oh my!
They're back with the Rangers for 10 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Brian, given the complexity of the world right now, Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, COVID, how do you stay sharp, or how do you adapt your professional technique and your journalistic approach to these times?
So you're implying that I'm sharp? I don't know about that. No, it's hard. It's when I got in this business as a sports writer, you want to cover games and baseball, but I quickly learned that there's a whole other side. There's a business side. There's a social side. There is a human side, dealing with players one-on-one. You have to answer to the players if you write something negative. So it's not just coming out here and watching the game and writing this and that happened. You got to understand economics a little bit, and you're writing about $1 million contracts, and And then last year with the protests and stuff, and you have to be sensitive to that stuff as well. So you have to adapt, and this business has totally changed in the last 25 years. Obviously, when I started, the internet wasn't around, and you weren't looking at game day, and obviously with all the analytics in the last few years and Baseball Savant, Fangraphs, some of that stuff on there is just mind blowing, and it's hard to wrap your mind around. And I'm still doing it. I'm still managing to adapt and stay up as much as I can. And maybe in 10 years it gets away from me a little bit more, but as of now, I'm still hanging in there.
You seem to be enjoying it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to enjoy what you do, and at the end of the day, it is. I don't know how many times I've been, someone comes to the house to fix something, or I'm talking to somebody and I tell them what they do, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's my dream job," and I just have to keep that in mind. That it is a good job, and it is fun. It is a lot of work, but you have to find a way to keep it fresh and stay fresh, and not lose sight of how important it is to do a good job covering the team.
I think a lot of us here have been reading your work for many, many years, so I know we all appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think this will be my 18th season covering the team, which is really hard to believe. I didn't know if I'd make it through a month or a year or 2 years, and to be doing it 18 years now, it blows me away.
That's great.
Well, we thank you for coming tonight. I mean, you have plenty to do, and you did make time for us. And I guess you got my email. For some reason, I couldn't find you, but I did.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. I'd actually remembered earlier today, and then I forgot. So I was watching TV, and then I got the email. I was like, "Oh man!" So I'm glad you emailed me. So I didn't want to miss it.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
All right, Mr. Chestnut. We put Chris off so much it's unbelievable.
Let me share my screen and see if this works, because I got a presentation for you guys this evening.
Ooh.
All right, you should be able to see our wonderful logo.
Yes.
All right, so there's going to be some video I'm going to try to play with this as we go through, and we'll see if it works. I've been testing it, so I hope it all comes out. So last summer, I heard a story about a teenage player I think it's for Houston. It was for Houston. And so I got interested in seeing if there was any interesting stories about teenage players. And when I first looked at Major League Baseball as a whole, I said, well, that's just too many. I can't sort that out in time to get any interesting stories. So I decided to focus on just the players who debuted as teenagers for Houston, either the Colt 45s or the Astros. And there were 16 of those, half of them in 1963, but the last one was in 1970. So I was going to go through and just kind of give you a fairly quick overview of some of these players, of some of these players, and then kind of their impact, I guess, on the game. So in 63, you'll see the name, they're kind of in order of the date of when they debuted, and you'll see their ages. Of course, there was 8 of them in 63, and then it dwindled after that to just a couple. There's our chapter namesake, Norm Miller, who spoke to our chapter at one time. And then you get into some players I'd never heard of and really didn't have much of a career. And then we end with 2 fairly famous names. So in summary, we have the teenage players. You can kind of see their career stats. There are some big names on here: Rusty Staub, Cesar Cedeno, of course, Larry Dierker. And you could find all kinds of information about them. But I wanted to look at the ones who didn't make much of an impact as far as career-wise. These are the players who only played one major league season, and really a season could be just a very few games. These are the 7 that have made only one season, and of this group, 2 of them only played in one game. This is their one game in their entire major league career. So I was going to go through and let's introduce you to these players. First, we'll do the one season players. Candy Harris, picked up in a Rule 5 draft. He only got to hit once. He was used as a pinch runner. And of course, he struck out in his only at bat. And he played a few more years after that in the minors, but never made it back into the majors. Gene Ratliff, he was a free agent signee. He got to hit 4 times, but he struck out all 4 times, which is a record for most at bats with all strikeouts by a non-pitcher. And then he played a couple more years in the minors before he ended his career. Greg Sims, another Rule 5 draftee. His claim to fame was his next to last Astros game. He got his only major league hit, and it sparked a 3-run game-winning rally. He played 9 years in the minors, but never again got called back up to the majors. Glenn Vaughn, who was a Houston fella from Lamar and then went to University of Houston. He was signed in '62. He was part of the all-rookie lineup in September of '63. I'll go over that in just a second. And then he played 1 more year in the minors after '63. So the all-rookie lineup was the end of the 1963 season. And I got this information, and there's a lot more information on Bill McCurdy's website, where he has an article from Mickey Herskowitz, which explains how they kind of put all this together. But these are the names that were on the all-rookie lineup. Steve Hertz, he was signed as an amateur free agent. He played in 5 games, and he had 5 minor league seasons. But his baseball legacy was in coaching. In Florida, he led a team to the state championship in '78, and then was inducted into the High School Hall of Fame. And then he went on to coach at Miami-Dade College for a number of years.
Oh my.
And he was elected into that Hall of Fame also. So he's in 2 Halls of Fame. Now, when he retired from Miami-Dade, the school put together a film of his career highlights. And at the beginning of that film, he talks about his time being signed by the Astros. So I'm going to attempt to play this, the portion of it where he talks about Houston. So it's a minute or so long. And let's hope that the sound comes up with this.
Well, I started playing baseball at a young age in Little League, and then played all the way up through high school, and then signed a professional contract my last year in high school. I signed a contract with the Houston Astros. At the time, it was the Houston Colt 45s in 1964, and then they became the Astros in 1965.
Steve, have you ever thought that you would have been better off going into Major League Baseball out of college instead of high school?
Yes, I thought about that a lot, and I found that, well, I'm really glad that I went into it right out of high school, because I feel I've gained a lot of experience, more than I would in maybe 3 or 4 years of college.
Well, a lot of things. First of all, probably being too young to really understand what you need to do at that level coming from high school, and then all of a sudden your next step is on the bench with a big league team. It may have been better off going right to the minor leagues and seeing what it's like, have to play every day, 7 days a week, hard travel, the grind that it is in the minor leagues to be able to stay and produce day in and day out, and be able to move so you can move up a level hopefully each year to get to the big leagues. So to start out at that level is probably in the long run not a good thing. So in retrospect, there's a lot of lessons to be learned.
So now we're going to talk about the 2 players that only played in 1 game. And the first was really the inspiration for this, Jay Dahl. He was signed as an undrafted free agent. In his first professional season in the minors, he had a very good season. He made his first start July 25th. And he had a perfect game through 7 and ended up losing 1-0 in 9 innings. Here's the box score from that game. He gave up, it was really the second game of a doubleheader. It was only supposed to go 7, but it was tied. They went in the 8th. Base runner got on by error. And then in the top of the 9th, Dahl gave up a solo home run, and he lost 1-0. But you see, he struck out 17, didn't walk anybody. And the interesting thing was in the first game for Moultrie, the Moultrie starting pitcher also threw a 1-hitter, but he won his game. And in this game, there was 3 players you see in red who made it eventually to the major leagues. He was a starting pitcher in the all-rookie lineup in 63 at only age 17. And then a couple of years later, he had just pitched the Salisbury Astros into first place. The team was invited over to the club president's house for a steak dinner. He went to a movie with a teammate afterwards, and then on the way back from that movie was killed in a 1-car accident.
Oh,
the team
God.
driving, he was a passenger, and unfortunately, he is now the youngest former player to ever die at the age of 19. I didn't want to end on a sad note, so we're going to talk about the other player who had a 1 game for the Astros. Everybody knows his story. John Pachoric signed as an amateur free agent. He played in the 63 season finale. And of course, he had 3 hits in 5 plate appearances, and ended his career with a 1,000 batting average. Now, in 2015, on his 70th birthday, he was on the MLB Network show where they were interviewing him about his 1 game career. Now, I've edited the clip to just his responses. So if it sounds a little disjointed, that's because I took out most of the questions from the interviewers.
Well, I was in Houston to get looked at for my back. I was having some back problem. And afterwards, after staying there for a while, and they were having a few all rookie team games, and they played the Mets, I think the day before, and we lost. And then somehow somebody asked me I don't even know why they asked me, because I was there just, getting treatment. And they asked me if I would like to play. And I said, yes, I would. There's no doubt about that. And I didn't care how bad my back was hurting at the time. I wanted to play. And of course, the story goes, I had a very good day. Made some catches, ran well. And I actually, during the game, I didn't feel anything in my back. I was so excited about being able to play. And as it turns out, I was immortalized in that game. Yeah, it was really an exciting time for me too. But even after that happened, when the game was over, I couldn't figure out how I was going to continue, because my back was always, hurting to a large extent. I did everything I could physically to try to get it back into, muscle exercises and stuff. But
so that's how your career ended, because the back injury, you weren't able to come back and play anymore? Is that
right.
what
Well,
happened?
I went to spring training, and there was a bunch of publicity saying that I was going to be the next superstar for the Colt 45s or the Astros coming up. And then but I knew that unless something happened with my back, I was there's no way that I could really play, because I wanted to play 100% all the time. And they gave me every opportunity the following spring training. They played me every game. I was supposed to be the center fielder and everything, and I could run all right, and I swung the bat pretty good. But every time I bent over, my back just killed me. And so I didn't really tell anybody about it, because I was just a naive 8-year-old.
How's your back to this day? I know you're 70 today. Is the back all right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I did have a spinal fusion back operation in 1964. And it I thought it was going to heal me and come back, but afterwards, all these ramifications, I kept pulling muscles all over the place, and so I was never able to make it back, although I tried. And but since then, I've been feeling well enough to participate in life as it is, and coach and teach and stuff like that. Well, I didn't know what was going to happen. You know, it's kind of a unique situation that everybody tells me, and I can recognize it, that record will never be broken unless somebody else experiences the same circumstances. It was the final game of the season. Had I played in the game before and went 3 for 3 and did all this stuff, the chances of my doing the same thing the following day would have been very slim. But it happened on the last day of the season. So, and since I never played again, because after during spring training, and everybody was wondering what the heck was happening with me because I didn't have a very good spring, and I went to the minor leagues, and then I finally admitted that my back was killing me, and so they finally had me have the operation. But I never played another game in the big leagues, and so that's why I have that record.
So kind of to wrap up, Houston teenage players kind of had some moments in history. We had the one with the more strikeouts by a non-pitcher. We sadly had the youngest player to die, but then we also had the one with the career 1,000 batting average. So that's my overview of Houston's teenage players. And if we have any questions, I'll try to answer them the best I can.
Terrific.
Man,
fascinating.
Lots of human interest, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're only going to play in one season and a handful of games, you can always find information about the great players, but you can hardly find anything about those one season, one game kind of guys. So finding out about the guy that coached in Miami, he actually coached one season in the Israeli baseball league that they had for 1 year in 2007. So he, devoted his life to baseball as a coach and was extremely successful at it. So
yes,
that was really good, Chris. I've always loved that all rookie team, and there were so many. Well, of the 9 players, there was Staub and Joe Morgan and Wynn, and the catcher for the Mets. Really had some good players on that thing, and that the pitcher. That's a sad story. I didn't know about the 4 strikeouts being a record. But I really liked your report, and if you'll remember, we met with Luno at the SABR meeting up there. Jimmy Wynn was there. He played in that game. And I don't know what year it was, 2015, 16, somewhere in there, but we were calling up all these people, and we had actually played around 12 or 13 rookies that season. And I suggested to Luno that maybe they should have an all-rookie game, because maybe it was 2013, it would have been the 50th anniversary of that game. But he misunderstood me and thought I wanted to have a reunion to get Jimmy Wynn and some of the other players back. But they could have recreated it that year, and I thought that would have been great, because that was the only all-rookie team that ever played. But we had a chance to do it again 50 years later, given the conditions of the team, but we didn't. I thought it'd be a big draw since nobody was showing up to watch the Astros at that time anyway.
Well, now that they don't expand the rosters in September, you're going to have a really hard time to try to recreate that unless you just have a really bad team that you can call up a bunch of rookies to fill out. But yeah, that would have been something, because in 13 they weren't very good, and it wouldn't have mattered if they played a bunch of rookies for one game at the end of the year.
So I wondered how many of these players you actually contacted and perhaps asked to be speakers at future SABR meetings.
They'd all be pretty old now, so it's hard trying to track them down. I have to look back and see how many of them are still amongst us. There's a few from Houston area, but a lot of them are from far away.
Mike, I think during the strike season, they had several teams that had all rookies. When they called up anybody who wanted to play.
No, I don't think so. That's still the only all-rookie team ever.
Replacement players. Oh, those teams are pretty thin. Okay. Thank you, Chris.
Good job.
Good job. We had 32 people on the meeting tonight, which I thought was really good all things considered, the storm and all. I've got a trivia contest if people want to stay for another 15 minutes.
Could I mention
ahead.
one? Could I mention one thing real quick before we start the trivia?
Surely.
The Seymour Medal was given out for best book of baseball history. It was announced, and for Stealing Home, Los Angeles, the Dodgers, and the Lives Caught in Between, by Eric Nussbaum. And Eric Nussbaum's a really good buddy of mine, so I was excited to see that it got selected. The book mentioned today was also in the running, but Stealing Home won.
Good.
We should have Eric come and talk one time. It wouldn't be hard to get him, I don't think.
Stealing Home is a great book. I've read it. It's just absolutely just wonderful. You learn so much about how Dodger Stadium came to be and how all the factors involved. So just I threw that in there.
Nice. Yeah, I agree. It's beautifully written too. Very.
Ted, why don't you go ahead and contact them and see if it might be available for our April meeting, which is April 19th.
I'll ask him.
Yeah, we can Zoom him in. That'd be great.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah, he's a great guy too.
Okay, I thought our speaker tonight was pretty good too.
Oh, he was fantastic. Yeah.
We have two speakers next lined up for our March meeting. Are here, Mike, you've got one. David King is going to talk about Ross Youngs, who was a ball player out of Houston.
Yeah.
Played Negro baseball. And Steve, I can't pronounce his last name. Anyway, he's talking about baseball bats. And he's speaking to the Baltimore chapter next month. He's going to speak to us also. So,
Who's the baseball bat? I couldn't hear you, Bob.
I didn't pronounce it properly.
The Ross Young's book is great. I love it.
Padkovich. Okay.
I believe he's also speaking to the LA group on Saturday.
I wouldn't be surprised. Incidentally, if you don't read This Week in Baseball, This Week in SABR, excuse me, please do so, because an awful lot of good SABR chapters having meetings by way of Zoom. And that's how we've gotten some of our speakers, by listening to the Baltimore chapter meetings. And Scott has helped us out in lining up some speakers. There's some awfully good ones. The SABR 50th anniversary meeting with Bob Costas on January 30th was terrific. And there's also a Negro League session that's taking place once a month. So there's a lot of good stuff if you have some interest in. And you'll find all the information about getting the IDs and the passwords. Okay, questions. Here we go. This is essentially about spring training. Texas has been a hotbed for spring training from the early years. During the period 1906 to 1939, which 5 Texas cities hosted major league clubs? 5 cities. Bless you.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
14 of the existing 16 major league teams trained in the state of Texas. Which teams trained where? So of those 5 cities, which teams trained in those cities? Anywhere from 1 to 12 different teams. That's a hint.
Oh boy.
Now it's an extra point if you can tell me the year that they trained in that city.
Oh, good grief.
Which is a little difficult. And some teams trained more than one time in the same city or multiple cities. "19 correct answers. 19 answers. That's a tough one. I'll tell you well, there are two teams that did not train in Texas during that period. Who might those two teams be? One's fairly easy, one's more difficult.
Repeat that, please.
Yep. 14 of the existing 16 major league teams trained here. What city which team trained in which city? We've already got 5 cities listed. Who trained in each of those cities? Two teams did not train in Texas, and who are those two teams? In 1951, the New York Yankees changed from their traditional location. Where did they train and why? 1951. The Yankees did not train in their traditional location. They swapped with another team. Which team did they swap with, and where did the Yankees train in 1951?
How many more questions?
Several. How many you want?
This is plenty.
Prior to their regular spring training, the Yankees conducted a rookie school for potential prospects. Among the group was a third baseman and a shortstop who made the 25-man roster. Who were they? And what numbers were they assigned? What uniform numbers were they assigned? One is easy, one is
I love the Yankees.
Love the Yankees, yeah.
Oy vey.
Well, okay. Ready?
No.
Okay. Mike, you got it. Okay. Which former Houston Colt 45 was a licensed barber, and since he is the only one within 20 miles of his spring training site, he made more money cutting hair than he did playing baseball?
That's one I know.
All right, Mark, and I'll throw in a clue. He's spoken to our chapter.
He what?
He has appeared. He's spoken to our chapter. He's
And
appeared.
that's
He's
one I
come to
know
our
because-
chapter, Mike.
That's one I know because Mark knows it.
I still couldn't hear the last thing you said. Mark Chapman, what'd you say? He made more money than cutting hair than he did.
He did his major league contract.
And then?
That was it. He made more money cutting hair in spring training than he did playing baseball.
That's probably not true, but yeah.
That's what he says in his book.
Yeah, yeah.
He wrote a book too. Houston Colt 45.
I'll challenge him on that one.
I don't think he made much money, Mark. Which left-handed, in 1957, which left-handed pitcher was sent down to the minors so the club could activate a just signed college player with no professional experience?
Once again?
1957, which left-handed pitcher was sent down to the minors so the club could activate a just signed college player with no professional experience? As a clue, both went to the Hall of Fame for different reasons.
57?
57, yes.
Left-hander, Hall of Fame.
I
That's not the Preacher Row.
I have a feeling the year is wrong there, but
He didn't play in 57.
or else it happened 2 times.
Well, he didn't play for, he sat on the bench for a couple of years. Anyway, that's okay. What Hall of Fame pitcher had as many hits as wins? And what was the number? What Hall of Fame pitcher had as many hits as wins? And what's the number? And one more question after that one. Francis, you got? Oh, he's muted. Name.
I'm off mute.
There you go. Francis back. Okay. Name 4 players who played more than 3,000 games for their major league franchise. Name 4 players who have played more than 3,000 games for their major league franchise. Okay. Ready for the answers? Okay. What are the 5 cities in Texas that have hosted spring training?
Houston,
Yes.
Galveston,
Say what again?
Galveston,
Yes.
Beaumont,
Beaumont? No.
Marlin.
Marlin? Yes. Marlin Springs?
San Antonio.
Yes.
What was the one before San Antonio?
Marlin. Like
Marlin.
the fish.
Right near Waco. I think it's Marlin Springs.
Dallas?
No.
No, Dallas. Good.
No. One more.
Victoria?
New Brownsville.
Brownsville.
New Brownsville. Okay.
So San Antonio, Marlin, Houston,
Galveston.
Galveston was one. Okay.
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 All right. How many teams played in Houston? What number? And if you know the team, that's even better.
A 1.
No.
Oh, if you
More than
know the
one.
team.
Giants.
I have no idea.
Giants and Marlin.
No.
Shit.
Cardinals and Yankees. 1904, 1906 Cardinals, 1914 Yankees. All right, Galveston.
Wait a minute. The 23 White Sox played in Seguin.
I'm aware, not on the list I have.
Well,
I know
Need
the
to up
Giants
that.
trained in
I
Texas.
just remembered that.
What do you say, Mark? I'm sorry.
I'm pretty sure that the Giants trained in Texas for several years.
Yes, they
San
did.
Antonio.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. But not in Houston. All right,
And they-
Galveston is next. Galveston is the Washington Senators and the Boston Braves. 2. Marlin Springs. Mark, this is you. 1. The Giants were there for 12 years. 1908 to 1919.
I think the Braves were there too.
Not according to my records that come off Baseball Research.
We're going to find out from David King next month, I'll tell you.
All right. Okay. All right. New Brownsville.
No idea.
39 Philly.
Well, Dizzy Dean's team played there. I remember there, but that was a minor league, I think.
Well, he played for you.
Yeah. Phil, I got to go.
13 teams played in San Antonio. 13 teams.
Yeah, the Giants.
Well, wait a minute. You told me I was wrong when I said the Giants trained in Mineral Wells. I mean, Marlin.
Hill Springs, yeah. That's where they trained.
But that was right.
They also trained in San Antonio. See, some teams trained in more than one place.
But they trained for 8 years. The question was, what was number 2? What was the question?
14 or 16 teams.
Yeah. There were 16 teams, 14 of them trained in Texas. Where did they train? And I said some were in multiple cities. They didn't just train in one city, they trained in several cities.
Okay, I got confused here somewhere.
Orioles, Braves, the Browns, Tigers, White Sox.
Can't hear you, Bob.
And Pirates.
Your audio
Bob,
went
can't
away.
hear you. You got to talk in front of the mic.
All right, where's my mic? Okay.
Well, it's when you're facing us, not when you're off to the side.
All right. Can you hear me better?
Yeah.
Okay. San Antonio was the Indians, Reds, Tigers, A's, Indians, Cardinals, Braves, Giants, Browns, Red Sox, White Sox, and Pirates. Okay.
Was there a question where you asked?
Asked how many. The question is how many trained in each city, but the bonus was if you could pick out the team.
Was there a question where you asked what teams train in the same city 2 or more times?
No. No. That was not a question.
I misunderstood.
Okay. What 2 teams did not train in Texas during that period?
Yankees and the A's.
No.
Neither
White
one.
Sox and somebody.
The who?
White Sox.
No, the Cubs.
Cubs.
Remember, they went that island off Los Angeles. Wrigley owned.
Catalina. Yeah.
Catalina. And the Dodgers.
Cubs and Dodgers.
Yep. All right. We'll go real quick. 1951, where did the Yankees train? Who they swap their site with?
Giants.
That's correct.
Went from St. Petersburg to Arizona.
Phoenix. Correct.
Yeah.
And why did they do that? Because the owner Del Webb lived in Arizona.
That's
He
right.
wanted to show off his team.
Yes.
I want to go back one because in David King's book, he talks about the 23 White Sox who were still off the 1919 Black Sox scandal, training in Seguin, and they closed the town down that day when they played the Giants, who were in San Antonio and were the world champions. It was the only time the Giants played a game at Seguin, but it was probably the biggest day in Seguin history. And the White Sox only trained there in 1923. That was the only year they did it.
I'll take your word for it, Mike.
Okay, I just want to put that in. I'm going to give myself a point.
All right. Who were the two rookies that the Yankees brought up to rookie school and then made the varsity? One was a third baseman and one was a shortstop.
Boyer and Martin.
Say that. Who and Martin?
Pete Boyer and Billy Martin.
Nope.
One of them's Mickey Mantle.
One was Mickey Mantle, without a doubt. He was the shortstop they brought in. Yes. The other one was Gil McDougal. Now, what numbers were they assigned? Maxwell, do you know that?
Mantle
Five
was
and
Farm
six.
six.
number. Huh?
Mantle was 6.
Correct.
One was 6.
McDougal was
12. He was 12.
12.
McDougal also set a rookie record in the World Series by being the first rookie to hit a grand slam in 1951.
Called him up from Beaumont.
Yeah. Right. Okay. What former Houston Colt 45 cut hair during spring training? Yes,
Bob,
Mark.
you got to get all in front. Call it. Couldn't hear you again.
Which former Colt 45 cut hair during spring training? Since he was a licensed barber. He made
Norm
more
Miller.
money cutting hair than he did
Norm
playing
Miller?
baseball. Who?
Norm Miller?
No. Mark knows.
J.C. Hartman.
J.C. Hartman in person. Yep. That's right. Very good.
In his book, he's got a picture of himself in a white barber's smock and Willie Mays sitting in the chair getting a haircut.
Exactly right. Exactly
Good
right.
job, Mark.
Okay. Who was the left-handed pitcher sent down to the minors so that the team could? I should have said the Dodgers. I should have made it more clear. Which left-handed pitcher for the Dodgers was sent down, so they could put on the roster a college player.
Koufax.
Koufax.
Walter
Who they sent
Austin.
down?
Walter Austin.
Nope.
Tommy
Lasorda was sent
Lasorda.
down.
Tommy Lasorda.
Tom Lasorda for Koufax.
Yes.
But that was 55, wasn't it?
It said 57 in my book.
I
Go
thought
check it out, Mark.
Koufax never went to the minors.
That's correct. He sat on the bench for 2 years. Okay.
Yeah, so Lasorda was sent to the minors to make room for Koufax,
Right. Right.
who was
Then that's
bonus
the
50,
opposite of
and
the
they couldn't
question.
send him to the minors.
Look at my book right here and see what it says. When Koufax came up. All right. Who are the 4 players? Last question. Who are the 4 players that played 3,000 games for one franchise? Or one
No, you
forgot
skipped
the-
number 8. Hall of Famer with as many hits as wins.
Okay. I got that later on, but okay. All right. What Hall of Famer has the same number of hits as he has wins?
Hoyt Wilhelm.
No.
Warren Spahn.
Warren Spahn, he says. Who said that?
Francis here.
Oh, Francis, good for you. What was the number?
I don't know. 363.
Very good. You're just 10 off. 373.
All right.
Very good.
Very good, Francis.
Got to get one right.
You got
But
it.
you're probably on one that
I'll
got
tell you
it.
one thing. If this were a fight, it would have been stopped for me.
Well, I stand corrected. Koufax came up in 55. Thank you, Mark. All right. What 4 players played 3,000 games?
363 is correct on the wins for Spahn.
About the hits.
I'm checking that
Same.
now.
Hits and wins, both.
Where is his batting? Here it is. He had, 363 hits.
363.
363.
Francis, do you agree with that?
Yeah, that's what I recalled. Yeah.
That's what Francis said. Give yourself 2 points.
Yeah. How about 22? I need them.
63. I guess I won't make up any more contests. 363. France, you get extra points. Very good. All right. Who are the 4 players?
Willie Mays.
No.
No.
How about Yaz?
Yes, that's correct.
Musial?
Correct.
Brooks Robinson? Brooks Robinson?
No, that's not correct.
Al Kaline?
Nope. One's a National Leaguer, one's an American Leaguer.
Al Ripken?
Now, Ripken, 3001. One more.
Hank Aaron?
Yes, he just died. Yes, those are the 4.
Hank had that many for
3076.
Oh, that's right. They just changed towns. They didn't.
Yeah, he played
change
for Milwaukee and Atlanta.
Yeah.
Same team.
Is it 1 point for each one, right?
Yes.
I think I got 4.
Well,
That's 4 more than I got, Mike.
But I think Francis had 6.
No, I had 4.
Okay. All right. Who had 4?
Was a
Mike
doctor.
and Herb. Herb, Mike, and Francis.
And Mark and Joe and Herb. Somebody else raised their hand. Max.
Joe, how many do you have? Joe.
Maxwell had his hand up.
I'm out.
Okay. MK, how many do you have? Maxwell.
Yeah. Actually, I had 3. Wow.
We're counting one per point on the first one.
Yep.
One
Oh,
on the
you just
second.
raised
Second
your
one, I
hand
got
because you had to
0.
go to the bathroom.
Most of you should have gotten 3 of the 4 cities. I mean, most of you should have gotten a point there.
Yeah, we got,
Come on now.
I got 3.
I think somebody's fudging if you're saying you got 4 points.
No, I didn't get much else.
Scott, what did you get? Oh, okay.
0.
Who else? Carl?
Uh,
I don't think Carl's there.
I don't know how to tally the points on a couple of
I
these.
think it's between Mark and Herb.
Like
How many did you
the
get, Herb?
like with the sort of Koufax one, does that count for 1 or 2 points? I mean, that's
2.
that's 1 right? Just
2.
That's 2 right. Okay.
I think I had 8.
Oh, wow.
On the swap of St. Petersburg to Phoenix, with the Giants swapping with the Yankees, how many points? I mean, how do you score that one? Is it just 1 point if you get St. Petersburg and
1 for the
Phoenix?
swap and 1 for why.
Exactly.
What?
One for what city and 1 for why they did it.
Oh,
It's
okay.
a 2-pointer.
Yeah.
So it's not for the teams, just the Y and the cities. And let's see, I've got Houston,
Mark's going to come up with about 22, I can tell you.
Marlin. I only got
I guess we ran off some people.
I only got 2 of those.
Got too late. How many you got, Mark? Estimate.
I'm still counting. 2, 3, 4, 6.
If he's still counting, he's a winner.
Yeah, you won. You won, Mark.
He's just not
I've
a
got
fast
8, and I
counter.
heard someone else say they have 8.
It's between Herb and Mark, 8 apiece.
All right, Herb, you do the quiz next time.
Mark, you've never done a quiz. Herb has done a
Yeah,
quiz.
yeah, Herb. Mark has. They both done them. Flip a coin, guys.
I think I did it last, so it's Herb's turn.
It has been a while.
Okay, Herb, congratulations.
All right.
Okay. Terrific meeting, guys. As usual, a lot of fun. Good comment. And
good job,
enjoyed it. Joe, you never did tell us about the Hall of Fame vote. Did you get enough votes to make a difference?
Well, if you got a second, I'll give you the tallies real fast, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Bonds had, well, let me see. Out of the people that voted.
Is this a chapter vote?
Yeah, the last meeting we did it.
Yeah, out of all those that voted, Bonds had 9. It looks like Clemens and Pettit actually tied. Bonds had 9. Clemens had 11. Schilling had 8. Sheffield had 10. Pettit had 11. Wagner had 10. Manny Ramirez had 6. Heldon had 5. Sosa had 5. Rowland had 5. Vizquel had 5. Jeff Kent had 7. Andrew Jones had 3. Bobby Abreu 2. Torrey Hunter 1. Mark Burley 2. Barry Zito, Tim Hudson, AJ Burnett, and Ramos Ramirez had 1.
That's chapter
How
vote?
many people voted, Joe?
The amount of people that voted. It looks like
20?
19.
Okay, so nobody got 75%.
No.
Well, we agreed with the baseball writers then.
Right, agreed.
Why don't you do that again at the first of the next meeting? I want to find out who voted for Barry Zito.
Well, I do have that information, but I will not share it with you. Because it's in the Zoom report.
I'll admit I voted for Aramis Ramirez, so I was the only one.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Have fun.
Thank you, Bob. Good job.
See you next month.
See y'all next month.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
See you, Max.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.